Welcome everyone to the second day of our Environmental Financial Advisory Board's Spring 2021 meeting. Welcome everyone. Today I thought we had a great day yesterday. We're starting off our second day. So before I gavel in, I'll once again go through some of the housekeeping items. Obviously, the Environmental Finance Advisory Board is chartered under the Federal Advisory Committee Act. All of the deliberations and our materials are posted on our website and are available to the public at any time. And our meeting is being recorded today for record-keeping purposes and for note-taking purposes. And the notes and meeting deliberations will also be posted on our website within 90 days after the meeting is over. And so with that, Joanne, I don't want to spend too much time on the housekeeping items, so I'll just gavel in to open the meeting and turn it over to you for roll call. Again, officially my rolling pin.
I love it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Great to see your faces again. What a great conversation we had yesterday, and I'm looking forward to another great day today. Hopefully everybody's had their coffee. I'm going to start with roll call. For the record, I'm Joanne Throw with Throw Environmental, president of Throw Environmental, also a senior fellow at the University of Maryland. Proud to be chair of this group, this fine group. I'm going to go just like yesterday because we may have new listeners. I'm going to go through the list, and please just state your name and your organization, your affiliation. So Ashley. Ashley, okay. Brent Anderson. All right, let's keep going. Jan
Beecher, Michigan State University.
All right. Stephen.
Hi, Steve Bonafonte, Metropolitan District, Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay, I don't believe we have Angela here, but I'm just checking. All right, Stacy.
Yes, good morning. Stacy Brown, Freeburg Environmental in Denver, Colorado.
Good morning, Stacy. Ted.
Good morning.
Chapman. Ted Chapman? No? Okay, Zach.
Zach Davidson, Ecosystem Investment Partners.
Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Deal, Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank.
All right, Sanja. John.
John Friedman with Suez.
Phyllis.
Phyllis Garcia, San Antonio Water System.
Phyllis. Okay, Ted H.
Ted Hennepin, Hanford Sanitation District.
Okay, Craig.
Craig Holland with the Nature Conservancy.
Okay, our other Craig H.
Craig Rinkovich, Robert W. Baird.
John.
And Joanne, John Jones, National Rural Water, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Good morning, John. Margo.
Margo Kane, Spring Point Partners.
Okay, George.
George Kelly, Earth and Water Strategies and Bespoke Mitigation Partners. And Joanne, I just will note my live video is not working for some reason.
Okay, thanks, George. Cynthia.
Morning, Joanne. Cynthia Kohler, Water Now Alliance.
Okay, Colleen.
Colleen Kokos, Environmental Liability Transfer. I'm in Bucks County, PA.
Okay, Pam.
Good morning, Pam Lemoyne, Principal Consultant, Black and Veatch Management Consulting.
Eric.
Eric Letzinger, Quantified Ventures.
Jim.
Morning, McCough, Indiana Finance Authority.
Hey, Michelle.
Somebody unmuted, so please be mindful. And Jim, you were a little muffled there, so let's just check your audio one more time. I'm sorry about this, but Jim, could you say hello again?
Hello, McCough, Indiana Finance Authority.
Okay, that was a little better. Thanks, Jim. Okay, Chris.
Chris Meister, Illinois Finance Authority, Oak Park, Illinois.
Carrie.
Carrie O'Neill, Inclusive Prosperity Capital.
Okay, Tony.
Tony Parrott, Louisville, MSD.
Mariana,
Mariana Peavy, Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, Boise, Idaho.
Dennis,
Dennis Randolph, City of Kalamazoo.
Eric,
Eric Rothstein, Gallardi Rothstein Group, Montreat, North Carolina.
okay, Bill,
Bill Stannard, Raptalis Financial Consultants, Kansas City, Missouri.
okay, Carl,
Carl Thompson, Infiltrator Water Technologies, Old Saybrook, Connecticut.
okay, and David Zimmer.
David Zimmer, New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, Princeton, New Jersey.
Hi, David. All right.
Good morning.
Since I did roll call, did somebody join that did not acknowledge their presence?
I did, Joanne. Ashley Allen, IT Capital in Washington. Hi,
Hey,
everyone.
good morning. Good morning. Okay, anyone else? All right, let's get started. Well, thanks again for a great day yesterday and this morning. We're going to hear from me a little bit. We've got a little time set aside for the Chair's Corner. Then we're going to hear from the Environmental Finance Centers. I'm looking forward to that update. We have a proposed new charge we're going to discuss, and then we're going to hear from EPA on some of their priorities and take a little break. Got to leave you a little time for a break. So whenever we can squeeze them in, we will. And also have an update from the Chief Financial Officer, David Bloom. And we're going to get some advice back from EFAB on some of our past charges. I'm really looking forward to that. And then time for public comment. So a full day. And with that, let me start with the Chair's Corner. This is something it's new for EFAB, and I really appreciate the time the DFO is giving to this current chair. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but what I want to do is talk about a few things with you. And first is, this is a very exciting time in our country. New priorities. We talked about several yesterday, some great ideas that were generated from the group. And it's customary that the chair welcomes the new administrator from EPA. And with that, I have drafted a letter. The letter should be only seen first and foremost by the administrator, so it is not a public document. But this is my time to ask for your input. I have consulted and spoken to several of you, and just talking over the last several months about different ideas, and I appreciate the various feedback members have given. But this is my chance to talk about what's in the letter as I see it, and get additional comments from you. So I'm going to just outline what is covered. And again, this is a letter from me to the administration. It is not a public document. But this is, as chair, I offer our congratulations on behalf of the board, and I bring attention to the board specifically and our mission. I talk about very briefly our charter, and the makeup of the board, you amazing people, and the background you bring and the expertise you bring. And I highlight key contributions that the board has made. I speak about recent projects in particular, and I talk about areas that we are currently exploring. And those areas include, some that will get feedback that we've just finished, but also some that we've talked about on our proposed charges. But lastly, I mentioned, and I'm trying to keep this, it sounds like a lot in one letter, and I'm trying to keep it very concise, but I talk about areas where we could prove to be a valuable resource to the new administrator. And to that end, I want to tee up a couple ideas I had, and then open it up to the group, if I may. So the first one is, as we're looking at green banks, around the country, green banks are really starting to expand their work in clean energy to really look at resilience, climate resilience issues, and looking at financing for things like sustainable agriculture and ecosystem restoration and protection, and facilitating climate resilience through investments in natural infrastructure. And is this an area we could start expanding our expertise and our recommendations? You have, Karl, in your in your state of Connecticut proposed legislation. Very exciting things happening across the board with this. And I'm wondering if that might be an opportunity where the board could be very useful. In addition, enabling state and local climate mitigation and adaptation financing capacity by establishing innovative institutional structures such as climate reserve funds and resilience finance authorities. I had the pleasure of working with counties in Maryland, specifically on developing climate resilience authorities. And this is an idea that me in the New England area, it's expanding. So is that an area we could really be offer our expertise on? And then also expanding the climate economy through linkages between the urban and rural connection that we talked about so much yesterday, and that restoration funding and financing opportunity. Next, accelerating large-scale ecosystem restoration and protection by investing in the co-benefits of climate change mitigation and resilience. And I think Eric Letzinger brought it up, and George yesterday, stacking carbon and water quality payments to farmers and landowners, things that we could really start exploring. And I'm also thinking of the connection between that ag and the urban. There are so many things that EPA is doing that really connect with the across the board rural communities that we could be involved in. I'm also thinking about ways that we could provide guidance on providing more technical assistance for funding and financing. It was brought up by Jacoby Wilson yesterday in our public comments about Justice 40, environmental justice areas. This is a big focus. And I'm wondering if we could think about how we could support these initiatives. So with that in mind, I also want to tee up the idea that yesterday we had our conversation with LEC, it was just such a good amount of feedback we captured yesterday. And he asked specifically about key forces or developments that he thinks that we could offer guidance on environmental finance over the next 20 years. And very specifically to fit in this letter, I'd like now to get some feedback from folks. So I've talked way more than I thought I would, but let's start with the conversation. So please give me some guidance and input because you are the experts. So let's start by raising our hands. We know the function by day 2. Okay, Dennis.
I just wanted to follow up with what Dr. Wilson said yesterday, especially when it comes to trying to provide help for communities to recover from past environmental problems and to bring a measure of equity to them. I know the problem that I've had in my different cities that I've worked for has been financially, it doesn't always look like there is a benefit or a chance of reasonable return when you invest in those communities. And I've always had a problem with that because the people there have funds to spend, they have funds to live on. And I see that we need to change the way we look at return, especially when we're talking about environmental justice and equity. And we need to get away from the idea of always a benefit cost and that type of hard return. And that means broadening the items we use to evaluate projects, the factors that we need. And I think that's really something we've talked about at NEJAC, and I know I've thought about it a lot. I'm a construction guy, and I like hard things, but hard numbers. But I think when it comes to bringing justice to a community and to people who've been just harmed by the actions of a lot of different things, that we need to account for more than just those easy things we can add numbers to. So I'll leave it there. We need to open up how we evaluate investments, both on the private sector and on the public sector.
Thank you, Dennis. Much appreciated. Okay, Karl.
I could just say ditto to what Dennis said. I thought Dr. Wilson's comments yesterday were quite powerful, asking us to focus on justice and equity. And Dennis's comments around measuring hard numbers versus something else. They're really, we just have to make sure we have a focus on equity and a focus on environmental justice. It's just now is the time. It just seems like there's just so much energy around that issue, and a lot we can do. So ditto to Dennis's comments.
Yeah, so thank you, Karl. It is, as chair writing this letter, and it's first and foremost on my mind, and I want it to stand out. I want it to be able to connect to what we as a board can do and provide that expertise. So thank you, Karl. Thank you, Dennis. Let's go next to Carrie.
Thank you, Joanne. I love the framing in your letter, and I really appreciate the call out on green banks. I feel like there is so much kind of untapped opportunity to draw the work of this board into what's going on in the green bank space. And I think about our work in the green bank space. We are aligned with DOE staff and programs and activities like all day long, and not really at all with EPA, except in a couple of places like home performance with Energy Star benchmarking, a little bit of the green and healthy homes work. To me, there is so much more opportunity to have those kind of deep connections with EPA as an agency, like we have at DOE. And it feels like this board is a great place to really explore that, lift that up, create those pathways. And the local green bank movement is just burgeoning across the country, in part spurred by the proposed legislation for a national green bank, national climate bank that has a more expansive definition. It's called the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator. It's in the American Jobs Plan. It was in President Biden's call out, his summary document of that proposed legislation. And so I think it's just got a lot of great potential. And then last, I would call out the fact that 40% of the National Climate Bank proposed activities are meant to go directly to benefit frontline environmental justice, low income, Native, communities of color. And this is something that our boundaryless green bank, this is where we focus. And I'm just so excited about that opportunity and a real connection to the work of this board.
Good. Oh, Carrie, you might be a good resource before I hit send. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ashley.
Hey, Joanne. Yeah, great letter. And I love the idea of a section probably at the end of the letter that says, this is what EFAB thinks environmental finance will look like in 30 years. And maybe, well, I don't need to map that out based on what I think right now, but I do, as I said yesterday, and we talked about quite a bit yesterday, I think this notion that pricing, that in the future, the cost of capital will price in environmental risk and price in environmental impact. I mean, that's a bold vision, but the risk is going to be easier. But if we can price in the impact as well, and lots of people are working on it, and I'm convinced that'll happen. So yeah, if we have 3 or 4 that we all agree are visionary stakes and we're willing to put them in writing in this letter, I think that could be really compelling.
Thank you, Ashley. Yesterday's conversation really sparked some ideas. What EFAB does best is that innovative thinking. And, maybe today, and I'm going to task you with reminding me in case I forget, Ashley, but, we're going to hear from the CFO today, and maybe we tee up the idea of how we as a board could help move forward some of the strategic thinking on the futures thinking, how we help inform that process. So remind me, Ashley, I'm gonna, if I don't get to it today, you're gonna back me up. So
Absolutely,
thank you for
will
that.
do.
Great recommendations. Okay, Margo.
Thank you, Joanne. I thank you for sharing this with us. I find the vision and thoughts that you're laying out really inspiring and exciting in terms of directions for the future. One thing I would encourage us all to think about and hold close, and maybe this is something that you might want to consider, is when we're talking about the environmental justice side and the communities that are self-determining, apparently, in this definition, how do we center our decision-making and governance processes around their voice and need? All of this great infrastructure that we're setting up, all of these resources that we're trying to direct these communities, I fear has these all bear risk of being ineffective if the community's experience and needs and voice are not at the table and present in making these decisions. And I don't think that they systematically are at the table. And that has been a kind of common misstep in many sectors, community development included, not just on the environmental side. But I would really encourage thinking through, with the green banks and everything else that's being set up, the climate resilience authorities, instead of having a top-down decision-making process and governance process. And even with the EFAB, for example, like, how do we get that community voice front and center so that we make sure that the solutions we're designing are reflecting their immediate needs and priorities?
So Margo, excellent point. And maybe part of the conversation when we listen to the EFCs coming up next, we could think through that question and pose it to them and get a response from them as well to see how it can inform what we do and how we can help. So thanks. Dennis, you still have your hand up, or is that a new question? I'm
sorry, I'm putting it down.
Okay, I'm going to go to Craig, then George. And thank you, everyone. This is wonderful feedback. I'm most appreciative.
Thanks, Joanne. And I just wanted to underscore what Margo just said. I wholeheartedly agree with it. And we can actually look, if we're looking for some inspiration about where this is being done well, or at least starting to be done in a way that's a little bit more inclusive. The foundation and philanthropic sector has been spending a lot of time over the last many years trying to figure out how to reorient their grant programs to include more voices in the process and reorient the administration of those funds to ensure that they're not shutting out organizations that don't have the capacity of, like, the Nature Conservancy, a group like us who can throw a bunch of people behind sort of doing grant administration. And I think that we've got a lot to learn, in that process with the use of governmental and other public funding mechanisms. So probably not to go in the letter, but certainly, an area where we can, get some inspiration for any subsequent charges or communications that we do back to the administration.
I agree. Thank you, Craig. Okay, George.
Sorry, Joanne, for the video stream, it doesn't work. So I apologize on that. I've got it live, but it's not working. But
it's okay. We hear you well, so.
Good. I wanted to just raise something that it's near and dear to your heart, Joanne, which is this question of authorities and perhaps highlighting some of the work you're doing in Conowingo relating to that, which it relates to interstate authorities or the idea of what authorities could be, which is, pooling many sources of capital, leveraging SRFs, and then dispersing those funds in a very efficient way. And maybe that's the green bank dynamic, but two things. It's that efficiency of that authority that enables many capital stacks to take place, and then pulls it and gets that money out. But then secondly, highlighting the notion of this is potentially applicable to the interstate side. And so I do raise it as maybe a bullet that you might raise about some of your work in the Conowingo.
All right. Well, thanks. I actually did throw something in there about that, but it was very vague. So it's hard because I'm trying to keep this letter fairly short, and boy, this could be a report. But thank you, George. Maybe I'll emphasize it a little bit more. Jan.
Well, first of all, I know you've done a great job with this and given it a lot of thought. So I appreciate that. I guess an overarching theme here might be that the EFAB wants to challenge conventional thinking to some extent, or we want to be part of that. We want to challenge ourselves on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, but also taking that down to the practical issues of how programs work, what instruments are offered, how they are developed at the local level. So I think you might be able to come up with a theme that says, hey, we are on board here and we want to push ourselves as we also work with the administration, the universities, the centers to, as I think right from the beginning of this conversation was brought out, to step back and say, just because that answer, just because we've always done it that way, or just because, right, it's sort of been a standard practice, maybe now is the time to really open our minds. So I think something, I know you're good at this stuff. So, if you could capture that idea that we are, we're there and we want to be there and we want to push ourselves.
Okay, you're putting a lot of faith in me. I can do it. So Chris Meister, I don't see your hand up, but I see your message. So go for it. I'm sorry, I don't see him.
Thanks. Thanks, Joanne. It might have been a technical error on my part. I've got three quick ideas, and again, thank you. You're on the right track, as our colleagues at EFAB are. My suggestion on the green banks is that, and then linking your other idea of the authorities, why don't we call them climate banks, or climate bank and green bank? That I think ties what's coming out of the White House and in Congress and in the domestic budget, and frankly, in the headlines of the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times this morning. So call them climate banks because it's a broader umbrella and it can take a lot of these bigger ideas. I think number two, and I think this speaks to the strength of EFAB and US EPA's engagement with the investment community, is durability. Durable policy ideas is something that Gina McCarthy was quoted this morning in the New York Times. And frankly, I had occasion to listen to the staff director of the House Ways and Means Committee. Regulations can be rolled back, or even if you don't roll them back, you can always decide not to hire the people to enforce them. But if you have a financial contractual arrangement like your mortgage, chances are you're going to pay the mortgage and do whatever it takes. And I think that's in various ways, the various voices on EFAB of the investor community have spoken to the durability of financial relationships. And the third idea is, if we're going to move in these directions, and again, in full disclosure, the Finance Authority is a tax-exempt conduit issuer, but there are various versions of tax-exempt conduit issuers that exist throughout the country. So rather than creating something new, give this job to the state-based conduit issuers that are already charged with delivering the U.S. Treasury economic, the economic benefit of tax exemption on long-term bonds for nonprofits and companies and local governments and the state revolving fund. So again, climate bank in addition to green bank EFAB can deliver durability of results and financial commitments and impact, and then build on what we have and what already exists. Thank you.
I think I've captured that, Chris. You, as usual, you are always right on the money. So thanks for your input. I want to recognize that a couple people who, when I did roll call, they weren't on, and they are here now. Ted Chapman, you want to say hello, Ted?
I will say hello, and I will apologize for my lack of punctuality.
No, not at all. You're a busy man. We just want to recognize you as part of the meeting to be sure you're recorded. And also Brent Anderson.
Hi, folks. Brett Anderson. How are you?
Okay, thank you. All right. So what I want to do is wrap this up. We're right on schedule. I want to just say in closing this Chair's Corner out, I always, of course, welcome your feedback offline. And this is going to be pretty close to the end of my time as chair in a few months. So there is a process. My term has run out, and I've been attached to this board for a long time in one capacity or another. And it's just been such a great honor to serve as your chair. But this letter, I will get this out before my time is up, but there is a process for my replacement. And I want to now close this out and turn that to Ed for any additional comments he wants to make.
Well, this is terrible news that Joanne just shared for me personally, because when I signed up to be the DFO for EFAB, I thought I would get Joanne and to get to work with her for many, many years. And I did not realize, no one told me at the time that Joanne her term would be expiring so soon. So with this bittersweet notice, I will just let all of you know that the administrator will be selecting another a chair for this group, and that'll happen within the next a couple of months, because I think, Joanne, your term expires in June. And so we will have a transition, and it's not quite said yet, but we're likely to host a kind of a transition, either a virtual call or a meeting prior to that, so that we can also have a good send off for Joanne, as well as welcoming the new chair as well. And so anyway, Joanne, I just, I know we're gonna have a bigger farewell for you, but just want a personal note of thank you and all the great things that you've done, not just as a chair, as your tenure as a chair, but I know that you've been a long-term participant on this group, and before that also with the Environmental Finance Center. So I really appreciate your service, and all of you know this is a service that you are all doing as a public service, a volunteer work, and I know that you're all very busy, and I know Joanne's incredibly busy as well. So thank you always, and we'll be I don't know, this is an interesting term, but BFF, best friends forever.
You got that. And for many of these board members too, you guys have become so close to me. So it's been an honor and a privilege, honestly, one of the professional highlights of my career. But another professional highlight of my career is actually my time in the Environmental Finance Center network. And with that, how about that for a great transition? It is my pleasure to introduce my former colleague, Jennifer Cotting, who is the director of the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, and she is also president of the network. And Jen is joined by a few colleagues that she will introduce, but Jen, it's great to see you as always, and you guys are doing such amazing things, and we're very excited to hear all about it. So Jen, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Very special times that we had together in this network. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Cotting, Director of the University of Maryland EFC and current president of the EFC network, as Joanne indicated. I really want to start by thanking you, Joanne and Ed, for the continued support and promotion that you have consistently provided to the network. It means a lot to all of us. I just want to make sure you all know that, how much it means to us. I also want to thank all of you at EFAB for the opportunity to tell you a bit more about the network and the work that we're doing across the country, and to be able to participate in the meeting this week, because it's been incredibly informative to us and really helps us think about the work that we're doing. But before I delve into really talking about the network, I did want to take the chance that I have right now with the microphone to say how much we as a network really appreciated yesterday's discussions. Many of us were listening in and messaging each other back and forth about how happy we were to see how aligned the discussions that EFAB is having were with what we are hearing from the states and the communities that we're working in. And particularly, I think the discussion around opportunity zones really teed that up. At the Maryland EFC, we've been thinking a lot about how this program plays into our work, some work we're doing in the Elizabeth River watershed and some work we're doing in the city of Philadelphia. And I know a lot of my colleagues have been having similar conversations about the role that opportunity zones will play in the work that they're doing. And I think overall, the network is really thinking that this program, the Opportunity Zones, is really primed to be the conduit for delivering the environmental and economic equity that is long overdue and thankfully a priority of the current administration. But I also think there are a lot of questions that need to be explored. I think many of you touched on those yesterday. I think Dr. Scobie-Wilson certainly did in his public comment, things about, how do we ensure that not only the environmental benefits, but also the return on investment stays within these communities that are so desperately in need of uplift? Do we need to adapt the program to make sure that natural infrastructure is getting the same sort of investment opportunities as hard infrastructure? If we're connecting the delivery of this revenue to the state revolving loan fund programs, how are we ensuring that communities that can't afford debt aren't missing out? And even if these funds are hitting the ground in the form of grants, how do we ensure that the communities have the capacity to access and take advantage of these opportunities? I mean, these are all really great questions that EFAB's uniquely equipped to consider, and they're all questions that the EFC network is here to help you in exploring. So thank you for indulging me while I have the microphone. Okay, so the EFC network. Next slide, please. As many of you know us, and it's great to reconnect with so many familiar faces, but for those of you who are newer to EFAB or haven't heard from us before, I'll offer a brief introduction. I'll try not to make this an exercise in drinking out of a fire hose, but no promises. There's a lot of really good stuff going on at the centers, and we want to make sure that you hear about it. If you're not familiar with the centers, this is what we lovingly refer to as our logo soup. It'll give you a chance to see where we are. There's a center located in each of EPA's regions, and lucky Region 9 actually gets to have 2 centers. We are focused on the how do we pay question for natural resource protection and restoration. Being regional centers allows us to focus our work on the issues that are really at the highest priority within our region. But being a network is great as well because it gives us that opportunity to leverage one another's capacities and knowledge and skill sets and have a broader reach with our programming. Next slide, please. Who do we work with? As many as you know, the majority of the work we do is focused on supporting the environmental finance needs of local governments and tribes, and that's across multiple resource sectors. We also provide support and guidance to our state and federal partners in the form of connecting them to what's going on at the ground at the community level. We do work with nonprofits. Sometimes nonprofits are our clients that are in need of capacity building. And sometimes, there are partners that help us support community needs. They inform our efforts. They expand the capacity of local governments to take on environmental challenges. We also partner with other academic institutions in the development of tools and resources that serve local needs. And we work with private sector as well. And that runs the gamut when we say private sector. That's a pretty big bucket. That could be residential or agricultural or commercial property owners and working with them to take action on their own parcels. It could be working with companies that have complementary skill sets to ours, like engineering and design build firms. And it's also working with many of you in private sector finance and social impact investing to make sure that we're exploring all the options when we're trying to connect communities with different sources of capital. Next slide, please. So a great deal of what we do is designed to, okay, My slides seem to be doing a little dance there. Sorry about that. So a great deal of what we do is designed to inform local decision-making on how best to invest and leverage their limited local resources for whatever resource protection and restoration priorities they've decided are locally important to them. We develop tools and resources that can be used by communities to consider the costs and benefits and timelines of different resource management scenarios. We support state and federal agencies in the development of these types of tools. We also support state and federal government agencies in thinking about what the fiscal impacts of a certain policy might be, or what opportunities there might be to make public programming more efficient and effective. But the bulk of what we do is really the delivery of technical assistance, rolling up our sleeves, working with a community or a collection of communities and partners to develop financing strategies that will sufficiently, sustainably, and equitably support the programs that they want to see happen. Naturally, as you can imagine, there's a lot of outreach and education and training and capacity building that goes along with that, because no one is going to be willing to invest in something that they really don't understand the value of. So that outreach and education and the finance strategy development really go hand in hand. And, you know, overall, the centers don't believe that there's any one right answer for how to pay for resource protection. Every strategy that we develop really has to be tailored to the context of the communities and the stakeholders and the issues and drivers that are involved. But most of the most successful strategies tend to be a mix of cost-saving strategies like asset management and collaboration, a blend of funding streams from public and private and philanthropic sources, and then, you know, mechanisms that engage the private sector. So a mix of sticks and carrots. Next slide. So the sectors that we work in, obviously we work in water. We're located at WRFIC, and we have the good fortune to be able to work with Sonia Brubaker and Ellen Tarquinio and that whole great team over there. But the EFC's work is really multi-sector, and it spans whatever mix of issues best serves the regions that we're working in. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting to the good stuff. What are the EFCs working on? Given the expressed interest of the new administration and the current slate of EFAB work, we thought we would hone in on a couple of things today. I'll talk a little bit about the climate resilience work that's going on across the network. Martha Shields from the Region 1 University of Southern Maine EFC, and Chris Dodson from the Region 2 Syracuse University EFC will talk a little bit about the SNET project that they've been working on that's really showing how a regional effort can leverage the power of multiple EFCs. And then finally, Tonya Braunley with the Wichita State EFC will talk about a multi-EFC effort to develop water infrastructure workforce. It's really gained a lot of good traction in several parts of the country, and it has high potential for replicability, easy for me to say. Next slide. Okay, so the EFCs are working on climate and resilience finance to varying degrees and in different ways, but always with an equity lens. You know, I think we're really recognizing that at the end of the day, if we're delivering technical assistance and guidance on any natural resource sector, but we're not applying a climate lens and an equity lens, then we're not really serving or fully meeting the needs of the communities that we serve. In the network, our resilience work is happening at the community level, but also at the level of broader tools and resources that will serve communities across the country. Our colleagues at the Sacramento State EFC in support of Region 9 communities have created a compilation of existing resources and toolkits to help communities with their resilience planning. This compilation is really looking at multiple environmental sectors: energy, land management, waste, transportation, all that good stuff. They've also developed a complementary document to better equip program managers and utility directors and other sorts of local decision makers in being able to start to take on these challenges locally. It describes resilience planning, it gives definitions for terms, and it offers suggestions for how communities might want to engage different types of stakeholder groups. Similarly, our EFC has been working with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources to develop an action framework It's really designed to help local governments assess and advance their ability to finance resilience needs. It helps them incorporate resilience and green infrastructure into their budgeting processes, their capital improvement planning, really just to try and help communities clear some of those initial hurdles to really thinking about how to put climate and resilience into their existing needs. In addition, the Maryland EFC and the Wichita State EFC have been working on a GIS interface tool. It's called Classic. It's going to roll out in the next, I would say, where are we? In about a month, it's going to roll out. It's a community-enabled life cycle analysis of stormwater infrastructure costs. That's what Classic stands for. And it's really designed to support feasibility and planning of stormwater infrastructure at the municipal or the watershed scale. And it does this under a variety of different climate scenarios. The interactive tool also has case studies that span all of the US climate regions. It's meant to help stormwater professionals and community planners and local decision makers understand and compare costs, runoff and pollutant load reductions, and the associated co-benefits of different kinds of BMP scenarios under future climate scenarios. Also, the good folks at Wichita State have just hot off the presses released a new sustainability tool. This is a financial planning tool for water and wastewater utilities. It's designed to help with decision-making around investments in, and are their water rates sustainable for their infrastructure needs. They've developed this for the Region 7 states so far, and they're actively working on expanding this to for states in Region 6, and then they're exploring funding opportunities to be able to bring this sustainability tool to other regions across the country. And then in addition to all of these broader tools and resources, the EFCs are working at the ground level, that roll up your sleeves with communities in each of our respective regions to deliver technical assistance on climate vulnerability and capacity building and finance, which is obviously well aligned with the mission of the centers, but it also means we have a pretty solid bead on what's needed at the ground level. What is and isn't working for local governments, all of which, we hope to use to inform EPA programming and EFC, too many E's, EFAB charge exploration. Next slide, please. A number of centers are augmenting this broader view of resilience with programming that supports some of the specific resource sectors that a changing climate is impacting. On the water system side, by example, the Southwest EFC is looking at water systems in the face of a changing climate through a project with the Water Research Foundation. They are exploring how water, wastewater, and stormwater resilience is all interwoven, and in particular, how these interdependencies impact other community assets like communications networks, transportation, health, public safety, utilities. And then, as a part of this, they'll be developing best practice case studies as well as a guidebook for small to medium-sized water utilities, with the idea of it will offer a roadmap for these utilities as they start to grapple with addressing these issues. The Wichita State EFC has been working on both a water equity roadmap as well as water loss as it relates to climate. The water equity roadmap takes a look at how deteriorating wastewater and drinking water infrastructure in underserved communities is contributing to water loss and decreased access to clean water. The roadmap itself is designed to be a community planning tool that takes that one water perspective and starts thinking about connecting water management with equitable water policy. And then understanding that water loss in and of itself increases energy use at utilities directly through additional pumping needs or indirectly through additional treatment input needs. And excessive water loss can really lead to decreased resilience in times of drought. So Wichita's water loss work is complementary to the roadmap and provides training and technical assistance related to water conservation and water loss and AWWA water loss auditing. And then pivoting from water systems to how climate impacts other specific resource sectors and communities. Some of our centers are looking at the nexus of climate and food system issues. EFC West is supporting the New Mexico Tribal Resilience Action Network with adaptation training, including building resilience through food sovereignty. And the Wichita State EFC is bringing community members together to discuss how food waste is contributing to overall climate health through a series of food waste summits. So that's a pretty broad survey of the EFCN's climate work. With that, I'm going to hand the reins over to Martha with the University of Southern Maine EFC and Chris with Syracuse to talk a little bit about the SNEP network project they're working on.
Jen, I'm just mindful of the time as well, okay, because we've got, we're 20 minutes in.
Okay.
I'll let Martha kick off the SNEP project because it's hers, but I'd just like to remind folks on the call that our colleague Tanya has been dropping in links to all these programs and projects that Jen's been talking about into the chat. So if you want further detail, you can look in the chat and click those links. Martha?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Jen. I'll be 5 minutes, I promise. I'm Martha Shields with the New England EFC, and we manage a, can you go to the next slide, please? And we manage a network of partners in EPA Region 1 Southeast New England program called the SNEP Network. The geographic area you see shaded in yellow is the program area, and it contains all of Rhode Island and the southeastern part of Massachusetts, including many Cape Cod communities. Our mission is similar to the larger SNEP program mission to build capacity at the community level to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, long-term climate resilience through management of stormwater and watershed restoration projects. Next slide, please. The SNEP network is actually a very unique collaborative model of assistance. Our 16 on-the-ground local partners have long worked in this geographic area, but not necessarily with each other. And by pulling them together in a technical assistance network, we aligned their expertise so we can meet communities' needs where they're at, and we make it as simple as possible to get things moving ahead. The graphic on the right shows all the cross connections and all the cross collaborations among our 16 partners. And while there's a lot of partner collaboration going on to deliver technical assistance on community projects, what you don't see here is what is being leveraged by those partnerships and the additional resources that are being brought into these projects. For example, on 2 of our watershed restoration projects, one in Massachusetts and one in Rhode Island, we brought in regional economic development districts, we brought in planning councils, condo associations, land trusts, and of course, we're working from the very beginning with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. They've been a great partner from the very beginning, and they're also on our advisory committee. In the year and a half of managing the SNEP network, there are probably tens of dozens of organizations and their resources that we are leveraging at this point. Another example of leveraging is through our local leadership exchange program. We brought in the Association of Climate Change Officers, also known as ACO, who deliver trainings and offer certified climate change professional credentials to anyone who takes their courses. The SNEP network is offering scholarships for up to 90 local decision makers to go through that course and get certified. This is a really effective way to develop local capacity and local leadership on climate resilience. So we're really proud of that effort. Next slide, please. And here's just a collection of achievements that we've had in the last year and a half. The network partners are supporting 12 communities, and the range of network projects includes stormwater financing and climate resilience, an LID and green infrastructure retrofit manual, local bylaw reviews, and stormwater planning. One very unique aspect of the SNEP network is that the funding support that the New England EFC gets from EPA goes a very long way, because up to about 85% of our total budget is piped down to our partners on the ground in the form of subawards. Our partners also include 2 finance centers, the Syracuse EFC in Region 2 and the UNC, University of North Carolina EFC in Region 4. These EFC partners leverage a lot of EFC network resources and expertise, but the rest of the funds go directly to subawards to on-the-ground local technical assistance providers. There's also a pool of funds that we set aside that is proven to be really effective that provide free consulting services like engineering studies or engineering designs in order to get communities to the next phase of implementation. Out of our current 12 community assistance projects, 7 communities are receiving free consultant assistance with an average amount of $30,000, which is not a lot, but it really gets them going to the next phase of implementation, and in many cases, the next phase of financing their projects. Our community reach in the year and a half that we've been running the network, despite COVID, is pretty substantial. We've reached 127 communities through trainings, webinars, and direct technical assistance. And a good example of our sustainable climate financing work is with the town of Bourne, Massachusetts, at the mouth of Cape Cod. They have a population of about 20,000 people. Bourne had numerous plans, but they needed to integrate those, and we helped them to think in a integrated and holistic fashion, and to go beyond that even, and to also think about long-term sustainable financing for their climate resilience needs. Our assistance included development of a climate resilience tool based on the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, using information that the community had on hand. And at this point, the town has now agreed to one of our recommendations to move forward with dedicated funding at the municipal level to address climate adaptation with a climate fund, which is really exciting and pathbreaking, not only for the SNP area, but also nationally. And finally, I'll finish with this. Some of the tools that we're developing, like our stormwater retrofit manual, the stewardship mapping that we're doing, the LID and model ordinance work that we're doing, these are tools that create efficiencies regionally, and they are all transferable. For example, we're going to be using the Bourne Climate Resilience Toolkit in 3 main coastal communities. And the Green Infrastructure Retrofit Manual will be useful not only in the SNP area, but throughout New England. I think the power of the SNP network is that we're creating common solutions to problems and developing tools and resources to transcend barriers to implementation, not only locally, but beyond. And just a word about what's next for us. We are going to be working more closely with overburdened communities. Hopefully we'll be working in a watershed that spans both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, the Blackstone watershed, which is an interesting bi-state collaboration on trying to figure out first how to work with EJ communities, but also how to look at watersheds more holistically, even through 2 states. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay, Chris and Jen and Martha, keep in mind, we're really running close to time, and I want to be able to take a couple questions. So please be mindful of that.
Yeah, in you saying that, I'm just going to yield my time and see if Tanya wants to put in a quick elevator speech on the Work and Water program that she developed and that we poached from her.
Thanks, Chris. I encourage you to look in the chat and click on the link to the Work and Water program. This program was developed as an answer to that. Where do we find that next generation of passionate, qualified water workforce? This group identified the next generation water workforce as a concern and an issue yesterday, and it's at the forefront of all the EFC's minds. So through 2 environmental education grants from EPA, we developed this program. A lot of the larger utilities have robust workforce development programs, but small and medium-sized communities just don't have the capacity to start from scratch and develop these big programs to encourage high schoolers or middle schoolers to think about a water career. So that's what we've got. Everything is available for stealing and adaptation. It's all on the website, toolkits for promotion, all of the learning objectives, the questions that you ask an intern, all of it's there. And yeah, dive in, take a look, shoot me questions. And if you need any additional resources, let me know. I can find them for you.
Tanya, thank you. So let's take down the slides and open up back to the gallery. There we go. I know we're just at noon, but I want to see if, there's so much here with the EFCs, and I encourage people who are listening on YouTube and also members to please, reach out to Jen Cotting as EFCN president and just ask your question. She can connect you with the right EFC, but from the group, please put your hand up if you'd like to address a question or two to the network. Okay, I know everybody's pressed for time. Jen, Martha, Chris, Tanya, thank you so much. You guys have done such an amazing job presenting in just a half an hour of all the tools and resources you have. So we're really appreciative. And I wish we could absolutely have much more time, so much to fit in today. So thanks for always being a great resource for us and for all the communities you serve.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Okay, so with that, Ed, we are on track. We are ready
Perfect.
to talk about a new charge. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, great. We have Dr. Widowski from OPPTS, and I wanted, you have his bio, and I'm really excited to have Dave come and join us because, again, I'm always really proud and of our folks at EPA, senior leaders, and Dr. Widowski is one that I think you, just like Widlack, you hear some interesting, so you have a lot to live up today.
I sure do. I wore my tie just for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. But the other part of it is that I wanted to share, just as a process note, is that yesterday we had a lot of conversation around member-driven charges. And as you know, until we made that change, in fact, all of the charges in recent years came from EPA. And this is continuing that tradition. Clearly, we have a question and a need that we have. And I think Dr. Widowski is here to present that and see your reactions to that. And if you refer back to our SOPs, you also will have an opportunity to discuss this and decide whether or not you would take on the charge or also charge as being asked. Because there has to be also a match between the expertise and interest of the EFAB as well as of agencies' interest as well. So with that, that was just a process set of comments, but let me turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Ed. And thank you, all the members of the Environmental Finance Advisory Board who participate in these meetings. I was able to participate in some of the discussions yesterday and find it really, really exciting. I spent a year in the office of the Chief Financial Officer when EFAB was run through there, and I'd had some great experiences at that time as well. So we're going to pivot a little bit, and as Ed said, we're going to tee up some conversation for your consideration. And obviously we see this, as Ed said, as a collaborative exercise, and to the extent that can elicit interest and opportunities for collaboration, we'd love to explore that a bit more with you. I just want to mention that I'm joined today by Allison Kin-Bennett on the staff in my division, who leads EPA's Pollution Prevention Finance Work Group, which is a team of EPA staff, some of our pollution prevention grantees, and other stakeholders who have an interest in the financing issues we're going to be talking about today. And Martha, who we just heard from SNP, is one of our pollution prevention grantees, as well as an environmental finance center. So there's some great cross collaboration and cross fertilization of these programs. So what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes is how, moving away a little bit from the discussions on financing public infrastructure and talking about how businesses can invest in environmental improvements and in ways that make good economic sense for those businesses, but for which there may be barriers to capitalization and financing. And what we see is sometimes those barriers occur at the level of the business, and sometimes the barriers are associated with the sources of those financings. We'll talk about that a little bit more. One of the things that I also want to note is that based on our programs and our budgets, we are not our pollution prevention program and associated programs are not the financier of last resort. What we're doing is trying to facilitate the marriage between businesses and financing for environmentally sound and business relevant capital investment. And so in that context, rather than being a party to the marriage of that financing, we're more in the role of a marriage broker, a long and traditional profession, as some of our cultures recognize. So the next slide, please. So I'm just going to take a moment to present a pictorial heuristic of something that's fairly intuitive and self-evident. It's called the waste management hierarchy, and it just recognizes that pollution prevention and preventing the problem in the first instance can be a lot more effective, and it can be a lot more profitable than dealing with the problem once we've created that. And what we see in the area of small businesses and manufacturing is that there are opportunities and pressures from the bottom up and the top down. And when I talk about the bottom up, I think about bottom line issues with businesses, cost containment, which may include material and operating costs. It can include cost uncertainty, which may include regulatory uncertainty. And so there's a lot of reasons and business reasons why businesses could benefit from investing in pollution prevention. And from the top down, we start to think about things like top line opportunities, value chain opportunities for entering, accessing, and in some cases, people talk about winning the marketplace. But what we're seeing more and more is that market share is dependent in supply chains where there is a push for increased sustainability within those value chains to have those investments and demonstrate that environmental performance. And so in that case, that is a revenue opportunity and a market opportunity for those businesses. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the programs that I lead in our Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. One of our big areas where we're working with those businesses indirectly is through our pollution prevention grant programs. And we've got about 60 grants currently active. And as I mentioned, one of our environmental finance centers is one of the pollution prevention grantees. What these grants do is they provide state, tribal, and in some cases nonprofit organizations funding to work with businesses to identify economically relevant opportunities to engage in pollution prevention or source reduction. And one of the things that we've done in the last few years in order to try to leverage our modest investment in those enabling technical assistance grants is to focus on sectors. We've identified the 5 that we're currently working on: food and beverage manufacturing, automobile manufacturing and maintenance, aerospace manufacturing, and the supply chains and maintenance, metal fabrication, and chemicals production and processing. And the reason why we've decided to focus on a sector-based emphasis areas is for the opportunities around amplification and leveraging across space and across time with entities, organizations, businesses in those sectors where we have a modest amount of investment. We're looking at opportunities to be able to spread those and developing typologies and tools that can be relevant, again, across time and across space for entities in those. We have been spending a substantial effort to spotlight and identify and develop case studies in those sectors to present not only the opportunity for source reduction, environmental improvement, but also make the business case for investments in source reduction. I'll talk about a couple of examples in just a moment or two. One of the other things that I wanted to mention is that perhaps through the market participation, I talked about that top line opportunities. 2 of the programs that are also led in my division are EPA's Safer Choice certification labeling program for safer chemical products and the environmentally preferable purchasing program that Allison is deeply involved in. The first provides opportunities for companies to seek EPA certification for their products. We have more than 400 companies, including a lot of small businesses and manufacturers, along with multinational companies that have over 2,000 products in the marketplace. And so they're looking for those market opportunities for sustainability and safer chemical practices. Environmentally preferable purchasing is a program that's mandated by the Pollution Prevention Act, whereby EPA provides recommendations and options to businesses that are supplying the government through federal purchasing for sustainability. And so companies are looking to access federal markets, which also are adopted by state and local governments and by the private sector. And so those are some of the pressures and opportunities for companies to explore, identify, and adopt source reduction and sustainability practices. Can we go to the next slide, please? So one of the other things I'll just mention briefly is that I have the pleasure of administering 3 different environmental statutes. One is the Emergency Planning Chemical Right to Know. The Toxics Release Inventory, part of that Community Right to Know program, has a lot of relevance for toxics releases and environmental justice. But it also collects information on pollution prevention source reduction activities by facilities that report to the toxics release inventory. And that gives us insight into specific companies in specific areas in NAICS or industrial sector codes that help provide some insight and opportunities for exploring where those source reduction activities and investments are already occurring and what we might do to leverage those more broadly within that industry, again, across time and across space. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what are some of the things that companies are doing in order to engage and invest in source reduction and pollution prevention? Good housekeeping, we can read that. It's the operation of machinery, materials flows. There's a lot of investment opportunity and a lot of investment payoff for control systems. And some of you may be familiar with control systems in manufacturing, but they provide some serious opportunities, not just for managing the operations, but managing the efficiency of those operations. Material substitution is an important opportunity in some cases for, again, meeting regulatory requirements, but also promoting sustainability within those supply chains. And I mentioned the Safer Choice Certification Program, which is a voluntary program, but again, hundreds and hundreds of companies are making those kind of investments for material substitution. And we see that in a lot of different kind of material substitution. Manufacturing modifications, we see that in some cases to meet sustainability goals within the supply and value chains. And in a lot of cases, those are simply good business decisions that companies could make. And we'll talk about that with a couple of examples, but also recognizing that there's some barriers. And then resource recovery has some bottom line opportunities for reducing the cost of materials and being able to reuse those materials. But as we also talk about creating an asset from a waste product and or managing regulatory risk, that's another opportunity for investment that can have a payoff to those businesses. Can we go to the next slide? So just a couple of examples just to kind of whet your appetite or maybe kind of prime the pump for discussion later. This is just one of the examples of a multi-regional, when we're talking about EPA regions 1, 5, and 9, developed a tool and training materials for metal workers. I mentioned that as one of our emphasis areas. The idea was to reduce their use of toxics, and that's primarily in the area of solvents that are used to degrease or in some cases serve as metal working lubricants or fluids, improve their processes. And I'm not going to go through each one of the lines on this case study, but it's happened. I just want to mention it happened in several, couple of states, just at least in Region 9. And the raw materials waste reductions are across different kinds of media. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see that for this particular tool and this particular training for this sector, the average payback was less than 2 years, which is generally in that kind of space. Sometimes we hear 6 months to 3 years is a sweet spot for companies that are interested in making investments and where they expect to get returns. Next slide. Thanks. There's just a couple of more examples. And this is meant to illustrate kind of the range of investments we're talking about and the payback periods associated with manufacturing. Solvent distillation, I mentioned solvent use in the previous example. A lot of solvents are used, whether it is in pharmaceutical manufacturing, whether it is in aerospace, automobile, or metalworking. Being able to distill and reuse those solvents is an opportunity. It requires capital investment. It can massively reduce waste generation, and the payback period can be less than a year. Another quick example has to do with painting and multi-component spray painting. Some industries that are working in that area are mixing paints before they apply them, and as a result, they sometimes are generating substantial amounts of paint mixtures that they're not using depending on how their production facilities are working. So consequently, an investment that some of those companies and those facilities are looking at is changing the way that they manage those materials in order to reduce and minimize or eliminate waste. And again, this example is just, average of a payback period of less than 2 years, a year and a half, and it changes the way that those companies are managing their labor, their products, and their waste generation and disposal costs. So those were just a couple of examples to kind of tee up then the kind of challenges that these businesses might be facing as they look at investing in these source reduction, pollution prevention activities. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is where we really get into the meat of the conversation. Some of the challenge that companies are facing have to do with where they're getting the funding. Are they dipping into their own cash reserves? How's it affecting their debt to revenue ratios? In some cases, some of these small businesses may not be used to borrowing money from external sources for some of these investments. And so there is, as Martha was talking a little bit about earlier, potentially a suite of activities. And I think I heard yesterday actually talking about new models of finance engineering. I love that phrase. And I think that's what we're looking at as we get into those next slides to talk a little bit more about that. These middle two bullets about providing information about overcoming the barriers of the momentum or lack thereof for incumbent kinds of technologies and approaches is an area where we're focusing on. And some of our ideas is how can we use that information to help broker that financing marriage between the businesses and the financiers. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of the tools that we've been looking at, or that Allison has led for some of the work of the EPA Pollution Prevention Finance Work Group, is a traditional lending. We talked a little bit about CDFIs, heard a bunch about impact investment. There's some government resources at the state level, very modest amount at the federal level. What we haven't done is for those industries and those sectors where we're looking at those kind of taxonomies and typologies of financing solutions is knit them together, again, in a way that we bring uncommon allies potentially together for, I think Carrie mentioned that yesterday, as a new model of finance engineering. And what we're looking to do is kind of tee up some of these ideas and see, where these gaps might be filled with some creative combinations of commercial financing and some public resources on the margin, where those public resources can really have an important impact on coming to a solution and a better place. Next slide, please. So some of the things that many of you are familiar with, again, the things that we're looking at as we loan bundling, we talked about the fact that some of these, a bunch of these companies are small. Sometimes they're making modest levels of investment. The fixed cost to a lender of spending a week or more developing a loan for $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 is just not going to be worth their time. And so I think that we're here to see a lot of interesting solutions in the idea of loan bundling. And how would that work for manufacturers in a sector that might be looking at a whole bunch of loans in in a state, in a community, in an area where there might be economies of scale from loan bundling, or an entity like an energy services company that's serving in that capacity to do that bundling. And that gets into questions of, if you can bundle them, are there opportunities for securitization? Can folks buy and sell those bundles? We start looking at some other financial instruments, insurance against enterprise risk, against technology risk, against regulatory risk. Can insurance instruments on the margin make a difference in overcoming those barriers to meet the hurdle rates that are going to be necessary in order to identify and adopt effective capitalization opportunities for those small businesses? And we throw in tax harvesting and loan loss reserve because those are part of the landscape. It's not kind of primarily what we're looking at, but then again, it might be part of a new model of finance engineering for some of these sectors, for some of the kind of businesses and the investments that they may be looking at. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I just want to mention a couple or a handful of the federal financing opportunities or participants. I should say there's not a huge amount of funding from the federal government for pollution prevention activities by manufacturers. No surprise there, but there are some interesting tools that could be brought to bear and partners that could participate in developing, as I said, that model of finance engineering. The Department of Commerce, both in their CDFI fund and in their manufacturing extension partnership, the latter of which works with manufacturers across the country with 1,400 professionals and 400 service centers. And they try to do kind of what we're talking about, is putting together tools and packages for those companies, but they haven't focused as much recently on the ideas of sustainability and pollution prevention amongst manufacturers. And this SBA, U.S. Small Business Administration, has done some work in this area in the past. They're not currently doing that, but again, they have state and regional offices that could be partners in this exercise. So with the next slide, I think it's our last slide, which starts to tee up those the questions that we wanted to place in front of you for discussion, just as a starter to explore this idea of finance and engineering and innovation for small manufacturers around source reduction and pollution prevention. Does a sector-based or intervention-based approach include some kind of economies of scale, and how would we approach that? How might, and I mentioned this earlier, how might be an analog of an energy services company type model be used for bundling? The idea, where you've got a large number, or at least a decent threshold number of projects, that by bundling can become a tool for financing those projects. What is EPA's roles? I mentioned our idea of a marriage broker and providing information, developing case studies, and doing some training. Are there other roles that we should be thinking about? Are there other roles that we could be engaging in that will help move the ball forward? And again, financing models, we are not experts. That's why we're coming to you today in financing models and approaches that we may not have considered, that we should be thinking about, that we can invest in. And can you help us identify some of those? And in that world, are there tools, calculators, tips, so that as we serve in that role, as I said, a facilitator or marriage broker, that we can help overcome some of the barriers that we're observing in the marketplace, for which there may be some real economic and environmental opportunities. So I'll just finish with the fact that we are looking at, I presented just very briefly 3 technology sector spaces. We're building a database about case studies, and what we'll be hoping to do and looking to do is, in the finance area, help provide information and tools, put those in the hands of our technical assistance providers, our industry partners, our industry associations, as an opportunity set that could be and should be attractive to those businesses, and what we can do to help make that happen. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and start listening to any comments, questions that you may have, and initiate discussion.
David, thank you so much. That was wonderful. What I'd like to do, I think everybody needs to just stretch though, and I want to have a good dialogue. So I'm thinking that we take our break that is at 1:10 and split it up for 10 minutes before we just, yes, I see some thumbs up from folks. So, yeah, and then they'll be ready to engage in a good dialogue as we discuss this wonderful charge. And what we'll do, just for the person managing the slides, I think when we come back, we'll throw up that last slide of the questions you were asking. David, thank you. That was very.
You're welcome. I think a
And
7
Joanne, I
minute
just want to point, oh, sorry, David. I just want to point out that Carrie already has her hand up, so she'll be the first one on the queue.
You absolutely got that right. Okay, so everybody has 10 minutes. So on my East Coast time, it's 12:25, so 12:35. I'll see you back here. Thank you. David, stand by.
I'm not going anywhere.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be taking me out to the ball game for a 7th inning stretch.
All right, calling everybody back. Carrie, just let me have a minute while I check and make sure everybody's back online. All right, I want to make sure our DFO is here. There you are, Ed. Okay, Ed's here, we can begin. So David, thank you for allowing us that break. You've got the questions up, and Carrie, I'm going to start with you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe I missed it, David. Did you say what the scale of financing needs would be on a project level basis, or an average or a min or a max?
We haven't done that kind of a distributional analysis at this point, Carrie. We're still collecting information. I introduced a couple of illustrative examples. They kind of go, they're in the 5-figure range up to maybe 6 figures. For the small and medium-sized manufacturers that we're looking at, we're probably not looking at 7-figure, but somewhere between 20 and 100,000 for the really small ones, and maybe up to $1 million or $2 million for the kind of the large small.
Yeah.
Okay. Given that small businesses can be anywhere from like 1 person up to 1,500, depending on the SBA definition.
Got it. Yeah. So, and that's very challenging lending, no matter what the domain, what the reason. I do think the CDFIs is an interesting partnership opportunity. And one of the challenges / opportunities there is they tend to be very localized. And so it would take working with like Opportunity Finance Network, the member network of CDFIs, to iterate a structure that could be replicated perhaps regionally across participating CDFIs. Unless you can find one of the bigger national, small B oriented commercial CDFIs. I do think, I know you had downplayed a little bit loan loss reserves. I think a loan loss reserve or a guarantee is going to be required in this sort of lending, even with an aggregated approach. In the energy space, whether it's commercial PACE or on bill for small business lending, you do see an aggregation role there with a utility or a green bank doing a CPACE administrator. But when those are securitized out or through a private placement, often there is some sort of credit enhancement that takes a variety of forms. In Connecticut, we worked with a large commercial bank to do a recapitalization of a small B lending facility with the utilities in Connecticut. And it required Connecticut Green Bank to offer both subordinate debt as well as a guarantee loss. It was a loss reserve, I believe, is the way that was structured. So I think in these challenging markets, deal size, small business, very specific purpose, it's got a technical nature to it, you're going to probably need a variety of tools is my thinking. And that's why I asked the question on the deal size, because that's hard.
Okay. Ashley?
I'm going to piggyback a bit on what Carrie just said, but this is such an interesting topic and really great thinking around it. My biggest idea coming out of the aerospace and defense sector, which is where I started my career for 10 years, is that we need CARPA, right? We had DARPA and we need CARPA. We need the Conservation Advanced Research Project Agency. Which probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, but maybe you could convince the current administration to do that and we would solve all these problems. But I do agree that, all these structures are out there, right? The SBA has tools, CDFIs have tools, OPIC, which is no longer called OPIC, has insurance tools. The programs are out there, they're just fragmented. And so it's just that it's the opportunity to bring them together, as Carrie just said, and I think that probably involves the private sector, right? To be the impetus behind tapping 3 or 4 different programs and bringing them together under a blended balance type of fund structure. And I just think there's enormous opportunity to do that at this point, particularly around small business lending, because it's such a pressure point and such an opportunity. So yeah, so I think focus on putting the tools together, and all of this is still done mostly at a deal level, right? Everybody scraps together little things at a deal level, and we need to start thinking about the financial engineering to make the fund pool as an aggregate construct that can deal with the risk, the inherent risks of these types of programs. So I'll stop with that, but
well, thank you. I mean, you and Carrie both, actually, you and Carrie both kind of characterized very compactly with some of the major issues. Our deal size for small business always going to be an issue. How do you blend together the tools? What do you need? You know, whether if you have to have subordinate debt or loan loss or some other kind of combination blend in order to make it attractive, because we're not going to have maybe a CARPA. I love the idea, but well, yeah, that may be a long time in coming.
Maybe.
And one of the things that we're wondering, you know, we've been exploring and wondering is whether working with industry associations whose members could benefit from that, you know, what kind of a role could they play? We had enough information to ask the question, but we don't have particular insights into what that might mean.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Others? Questions, comments? See, I gave them a break just for this reason. All right.
Hey, Joanne. Oops.
Oh, you see, your hand is definitely not working. Okay, we'll go Chris Meister and then George.
So David, Chris Meister from the Illinois Finance Authority. So I thought I heard you mention what in Illinois is called the IMAC, it's called it's a federal program deployed state level, like a manufacturing extension. What word did you use to make sure that I'm talking about that?
Well, that's a manufacturing extension partnership, and each one of the, I think, 51 grantees, like IMAC, I think is Illinois Manufacturing Assistance Center, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing.
Right.
So I think from my experience with IMAC, and which is the Illinois version of this, I think that's a great delivery system for once the financing products are more fully developed along the way that Carrie and Ashley are suggesting. And again, I agree with all of their comments and suggestions. But I think that if your focus market are small and mid-sized manufacturing, which I think is consistent with the national desire to build up American manufacturing and American jobs, I think that's the appropriate delivery path.
Thank you, Chris. Great insight. We actually have several manufacturing extension partnership centers like IMAC that are also pollution prevention grantees. And we used to actually do a lot of work with the manufacturing extension partnership entities at the state level through a program that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's moribund, but it's maybe a lot smaller than it used to be around economy, energy, and environment, E3. We actually have a website around that and some of those case studies, and the idea of rejuvenating that and using that as a tool for delivery, like you mentioned, is really exciting for us as well as part of that solution set.
Okay, and Chris Meister, I'm sorry if your raising hand function isn't working. Just do what you've just done, because I don't want to overlook you. You always have great feedback. So just speak up or put it in the chat, and I will get to you. But George, go ahead.
Yeah, it's great. Dave, thanks so much. And it's always a great joy to be talking P2, P3s, and we're going to have to come up with P squared and everything else. But at any rate, what's striking to me a little bit is when you had the slide on your challenges, to me, the challenges were not the finance side. The challenges were the uptake. I didn't see anything, and maybe I was wrong in that when I looked at that slide, but a couple points you raised, which is, they're not used to paying up front. They're competing for limited resources within the corporation, and you haven't quantified the inefficiencies and the benefits. And that's one scenario to me that I'm just looking at examples in other markets. When you do that, perhaps, this notion of, well, look, it's a payback in 2 years and you're going to do better in that side of the equation. But to have those analytics support, to me, then unleashes the demand flow, the deal flow. And then from there, financing flows a lot easier. And whether it's an ESCO, whether it's a green bank, whether it's an aggregation. And so to me, that the question I have on that is, how much work have you done in helping that, particularly that quantifying the inefficiencies and the benefits, the potential benefits?
Thank you. Great insight, George. And I think, those kind of case studies that I mentioned, it's at the bottom of the slide that's currently on your screen. We're working, spending a lot of effort currently to develop those case studies and develop a business case for them. Even as we do that, though, I do want to kind of harken back to what Carrie mentioned, and that has to do with deal size and then, bundling, and where we don't necessarily see an exact analog for servicing that debt, whether it's through a performance-based payment method, or whether there are other kinds of tools that we could be using. I do think that there is still some creativity that would need to happen in the area of bundling once we've made the business case at the enterprise level for matching up the needs and mandates of those lending institutions that may be part of that bundle. So great insight, and we're trying to work on that. And I think there's more that we may need to do.
Okay, thanks, George. And Ashley, your hand is still up. Did you have another question? You're good. All right. So David, what I'd like to do is I want to do a check with the board right now. It sounds like we have some interest. This is the first charge that came to us under the new administration. This is very exciting opportunity for our team to engage. What I'd like to do is, if there is enough interest, I'd like to propose we put an exploratory team together that looks to refine the charge, right? And works with David and his team to really come together on what our goals and mission are and what we could do, what we're comfortable doing, and how we can align it with some of these financing questions that are being proposed. So can I see, first of all, a thumbs up to move forward on an exploratory group coming together? And if you don't have your thumbs up function, you could at least use your, I'm looking at all the videos. Okay, let me just count. Okay, I believe that we have enough of a group that we have definite interest. This is exciting. Now, what I'd love for folks to do, because I gave us a little break. So what I'd like to do is have you put in the chat whether you are interested in being part of this exploratory team to work with David. And just let us know so we can track it. Tara can track it. David, any final parting words for us?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation. I love seeing all those thumbs up. Thank you so much, and look forward to working with you all, and appreciate very much your engagement. I also want to thank Ed again for giving us the opportunity to bring this before you. We're very appreciative of all of your efforts and your enthusiasm. Thank you. And I also want to thank Allison for all the work that she does for our program and our projects.
Well, Allison, at least should say hello, because I think the exploratory group, I suspect, will be seeing Allison quite a bit. So is Allison on the call?
Yep.
So
go ahead and wave, Allison.
Here she is right there.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Terrific, Allison. We look forward to working with you on this. Okay, that brings us, Ed, so apologies to Philip and Al, but I'm sure they're being patient as this is an important topic, but our next speaker is ready to go.
Yes, thank you. So we have two guests from Office of Policy, and one you already know very well. He's a third-time presenter, Al McGarland, but we are joined also by Phil Fine, who is new to the agency, and he is Mr. Biden's appointee to the Office of Policy as the deputy there. And yesterday you heard from Rosemary about the president's priorities and the administrator's priorities. And I've asked Phil to come and talk about the Office of Policy's work and the initial priorities of the Office of Policy starting out. And I think Phil actually came on the first day or first couple of days. So he's been probably here at least, around 90
Day
days
one,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, so 90 days. He's a 90-day EPA veteran. So let me turn it over to Phil. But the only other thing I wanted to tell you is that
I might have started an hour earlier than I was supposed to.
okay, don't tell people that, because that's not a good thing. The other thing that I wanted to kind of personal note to share with you is that I kind of gave him a hard time because he says he was from California, and he is from California. And he, you know, when you read his bio, he had a very distinguished career at the South Coast Air Quality Management District. As you know, it is the premier air quality management district in the country. No offense to anyone else, but you know, I also hail from Southern California, and those of us who are from Southern California don't actually think that Northern Californians are really Californians, and he's from Northern California. So there you go, Phil. We'll turn it over to you.
I was joking about that hour. I just felt like it. Anyway, I'm very glad to be here. I was very excited when Ed gave me this opportunity. And again, I'm joined by Al. And I'm really happy that Rosemary sort of covered sort of the general priorities of the administration and EPA, because I'd like to sort of jump into some of my own experiences in Southern California that I think are relevant to this board and why I'm excited to talk to you. But because the session is labeled policies and policy priorities, I just wanted to just spend a couple seconds on that. So obviously, it's no secret that, you know, the new priorities from the administration and, you know, our administrator at EPA are the intersection of the climate crisis, both working to mitigate GHG emissions, but also adaptation and resilience, the intersection with that with equity and environmental justice, but also looking at that from an economic development and just transition framework. And if you look at any of the executive orders, you see that theme through many of those. And obviously on the economic development side, I think this board would probably have a lot to offer. Within the Office of Policy, as you know, we have a wide variety of functions, but we have two groups that I think are relevant for this board. So obviously we have the National Center for Environmental Economics, and Al will say a few words after me of some of the sort of things we've been thinking about going forward. But we also have our Smart Sectors program, which is really looking to build relationships with the private sector, sometimes outside of the regulatory space, sometimes within the regulatory space as sort of a coordinating relationship building role. But we're also looking for new opportunities there for how we can leverage the private sector when it comes, not just the leadership that some of the private sector is showing for environmental improvements, but also some of the capital that they bring to bear. So with that sort of general stuff, I just want to talk a little bit about my history and some ideas. And you guys are the experts on this, so some of this will sound, I'm not an economist, but some of this will sound very familiar, but just why I was excited to talk to this group. So as Ed mentioned, at South Coast AQMD, I led the division that was doing all the regulatory work, but also all the planning work, a lot of policy work. But under the Clean Air Act, Southern California has the worst air quality in the nation. We're way behind on meeting ozone standards. And a few years ago, in 2017, we adopted our state implementation plan, what we call the Air Quality Management Plan, under the Clean Air Act, of how we're going to meet one of the older ozone standards, the 80 parts per billion standard. That the deadline for South Coast is 2023. So we were faced with the task of figuring out how to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions by an additional 50% in about 5 years, which of course is a difficult task, especially given sort of legal constraints and technological constraints and economic constraints, political constraints, you name it. And so what we did with that plan was say, look, if you want to get to 2023 attainment, you're gonna have to pay for it. So we put a price tag on attaining the standard, and it was $15 billion over the next 15 years, because it wasn't just the 2023 standard, we had another standard in 2031 we were planning for simultaneously. So if we could raise $15 billion over 15 years, we could bring clean air to Southern California basically after all these years of Southern California struggles with clean air. And of course, everyone, the LA Times editorial board called us delusional. There was a lot of outcry. And we weren't abandoning regulations. We were just being realistic that we know regulations, which we were committing to doing at the state and local level, weren't going to get us there fast enough. There was just no way, given the constraints that we had. So if we could raise $15 billion, we could bring clean air to Southern California. $15 billion sounds like a lot. It's not a lot. We have a $1 trillion GDP in Southern California, in the South Coast jurisdiction. This is a small fraction of that. We do transportation planning in Southern California on the range of 20, 30-year plans are on the order of $500 billion. So while it sounds like a lot for air quality, it is, if you could just find a way to leverage some of that other funding in the right way, you can actually make this happen. So, and the reason where the 15 billion came from is that South Coast had worked a long time on incentive and subsidy programs, especially for mobile sources. In South Coast, 80–90% of the nitrogen oxides are coming from mobile sources: trucks, trains, planes, cars, ships, locomotives. So we had been working with about $50 to $60 million a year within our area to help subsidize transitions to either natural gas or electric or whatever was available, the best that was available at the time. And because of that plan, the $15 billion that we put out there, we didn't get to $1 billion a year, which is what we needed, but we raised it to about 200 to 300 million a year through working with the legislature. So we didn't quite hit our goal, but every dollar spent goes towards public health improvement. So it wasn't necessarily, it's not time wasted. But to help with that, the Times editorial board about 2 years later was not saying we were delusional. They were telling everybody, give us the money because we need the money. So that was a success story for what it's worth. But as you're thinking about spending that kind of money, you're thinking about how can we do it more effectively? How can we leverage that funding better? How can we use creative, financing options or subsidy options to make it go further? And while South Coast had done a really good job of leveraging funding when it came to sort of technology development and deployment and demonstration, it hadn't done a good job of leveraging sort of our base incentive programs that were just giving people, $50, $100, $200,000 checks to buy a certain type of equipment or a certain truck. And we were thinking like our $15 billion is based on that type of program, but how could we do better? So we started thinking about it of how can we really leverage that? And there's lots of good examples of that, right? The other thing we were finding as we were trying to make this money, trying to find takers for the money, because it's not just a matter about having the money, you have to have people sign up to want to take it, it's voluntary, is we'd be meeting with companies or mostly sort of private, public sector utilities about opportunities that they had, and they would come in and like show us all the calculations about if we went this way, we'd have this benefit, if we went that way, we'd have these costs and these benefits, but we're gonna go this way because it's the cheapest. But the difference between the cheapest and the option that was much, much better environmentally could be as little as like a few $100,000. And I'd be taking out my checkbook and say, where can I sign? But as a public sector, sometimes there's laws and rules and policies that make you take sort of the cheapest option. So how do you break through that? And how many people out there that we weren't meeting with, that weren't taking the sort of the most sustainable option because it didn't pencil out? And obviously rooftop solar is a great example, residential rooftop solar, where, as soon as, power purchase agreements and solar loans and PACE programs, and then the cost came down enough, it became a no-brainer. It became a win-win. People were getting either savings on day one or payback periods of 2 or 3 years. So it really became a no-brainer. So we were thinking about how do you apply that more broadly to environmental regulations, but environmental actions more broadly. And then the last thing I mentioned before is as we're trying to convince elected officials to spend $15 billion. It's like, for what? If you could frame it as economic development, it can go a lot further, because that's not a big number for economic development in California or elsewhere. So we never really brought it to that point, but I think given the priorities of this administration, I think that's incredibly important, as you know, we're all, through all the agencies, are struggling with that interface and how to communicate that this isn't just about, you know, regulations and costs. This is about developing the economy in the way that we need to do it, and creative financing and subsidized financing, whether it's loan guarantees or lease payments. There's all kind. You guys, I'm sure, have dealt with this a lot. Like, it's going to be different in each sector for each purpose, but it can go a long way. So that's sort of my overall framing, and why I'm sort of excited to use the resources of this board to help us and see how EPA can help, because some of this doesn't have to come from EPA. Some of this can come from the private sector. Some can come from other agencies, but wherever we can help, we really want to figure out what EPA's role is in helping this out. So with that, I'll sort of turn it over to Al to talk about some of the work that he's been thinking about in National Center for Environmental Economics. You know, we've been approached by the Securities and Exchange Commission on some ESG issues that you guys might be interested in, but really figuring out where this board and EPA Office of Policy, or EPA more broadly, can work together to make some of these things happen. So I'll go ahead and leave the rest of the time for Al, because I do want to have time for questions.
Thanks, Phil. And it's good to see everyone. I think last time I was here, I took away a number of suggestions and ideas, particularly in the area of lead service line replacement. I talked about how we were considering, you know, how to work with the water companies to sort of figure out what's the best way to design lead service line replacement programs that actually gets people to participate. They're still having problems, frankly, getting people to line up, even when the lead service line replacement is heavily subsidized. And indeed, President Biden's infrastructure plan has a line item for 100% replacement of all lead service line. And so this work becomes even more important from that standpoint. We did actually, a number of you guys suggested, and we do have a rather large database now of what lead service water companies are doing. And we're trying to do a kind of meta-analysis of what works and what doesn't. And that's proving very fruitful, I think. And we're hoping then to work with our colleagues in the Drinking Water Office to still continue to try to do this behavioral experiment studies. And in fact, the University of Chicago is interested in partnering those. So that work's continuing. I think you guys, last time I talked, it was like an embryonic idea. And so that's really good. I think that you guys definitely gave me some confidence in that area, that there were data out there, et cetera. In fact, New Jersey, I think, stepped up, and we actually have most of New Jersey's data now. So, but of course, with the new administrations, as Phil mentioned, that priorities have changed a little bit, or at least there's new priorities in addition to the old ones. And that is, as Phil mentioned, carbon or climate change rather, and environmental justice. And so what I thought I'd pivot to is sort of how we're thinking about climate change in particular, both on the adaptation side and on the mitigation side, or emissions reductions. Of course, as an economist, I don't think there is an economist that doesn't favor a carbon tax or a greenhouse gas tax as a way to cost effectively get emission reductions across the economy. That's up to Congress, right? And so, Gina McCarthy and the White House, and Administrator Regan and Phil and Vicky Aurora are the head of the policy office. Their charge really is to think about things that we can do without new legislation as well. And so from that end, we really want to think about a sort of whole of government approach. I think it's a term that has been tossed around and used quite effectively, I think. And so how do we do that? And so it's not just about regulations. In fact, it's, although that's a big part of it, it's somewhat easier, I think, to think about regulations from to control stuff coming out of a stack, right? So it's either tailpipe emissions from cars, you can make them more fuel efficient, or you can make the portfolio of energy, producing electricity less carbon intensive. And so those kinds of things lend themselves. But if we just stick to those two sectors, electricity and transportation, we're only getting about 54% of greenhouse gas emissions in the economy. The industrial sector is responsible for 23%. Commercial and residential adds another 13%, and agriculture adds another 10%. And so the whole of government, we also need to be thinking about a whole economy approach, because if we're going to not address those other sectors, we're going to be missing a lot of cost-effective reductions. So how do we do that? It's sort of like with a wide portfolio of things we're doing. The first thing, you might have heard of something called the social cost of greenhouse gases. Sometimes shorthand is social cost of carbon. A person who worked with me on that in the Obama administration said that's the most important number that you'd never heard of. But President Biden put out an executive order his first day in office. He signed it, instructing us to come up with an interim value for the social cost of greenhouse gases. That's carbon, methane, and N2O. And then we have until January of 2022 to come up with final estimates. And we're intensely working on that right now. But we did get the interim numbers out. They should be out for public comment this month.
In Huntersville, it's our green.
So we're looking, hopefully we'll get some good public comments on that and move forward. But then the issue becomes, how do we use the social cost of carbon? And you can think about that in a variety of applications, right? So purchasing decisions by the US government, and sometimes that can set precedent for other sectors in the economy to also build in. So if you have a choice between, gasoline-driven cars and electric vehicles in your fleet, if you sort of weigh the social cost of the greenhouse gas emissions that might come, the additional ones that could come out of a gasoline-powered fleet, you might tilt the decision towards an electric-powered fleet. Of course, that depends on the carbon intensity of electricity that you're using in the cars. Permitting decisions, NEPA decisions, mentioned regulation. When we do regulations, even not ones focused on carbon, but there are lots of environmental regulations that take energy, frankly, to run equipment, et cetera. And so you want to kind of penalize those technologies or those options that are going to use a lot of carbon in its solution when it all comes out. And we have examples actually where using the social cost of carbon actually changed the decision in the process. And then there's, of course, there's public utility decisions and pipeline decisions. And how can we then take all those things and get the private sector to embrace the social cost of carbon concept as well in all their decision making, to change behavior. Okay, and so in this sort of residential and commercial space, Phil mentioned the rooftop solar. I think that's a good example because these things are harder to regulate, but we have sort of energy efficiency expenditures, also very difficult, I think, to get traction in the economy, and things like rooftop solar. So we, again, not unlike the lead service line replacement, thinking about a kind of wide array of things we can look at. Some are consumer choice and preferences. It may be that a tax subsidy or a rebate scheme or something could in fact change the payback period to something that consumers feel, it's within reach, and particularly in the commercial side of things. Phil mentioned the PACE obstacles and at least getting that implemented at a federal level. I was talking with Ed last night, and of course Fannie and Freddie, I guess, don't like to be third in line in terms of repaying bankruptcy debt. So there's also grid issues. I know Hawaii has had some issues. If everyone goes off grid with solar, there's no one left to pay for the grid. So we have to sort of consider all these things. But the question then becomes, how could we implement a strategy, including perhaps a regulatory strategy, that would accommodate these kinds of incentives to efficiently move towards a more renewable energy? I think the same on the flip side goes for EE, or energy efficiency expenditures. We faced that actually when Gina McCarthy was administrator on the Clean Power Plan. And that's still a tough nut to crack. And again, I think it involves a lot of consumer behavioral responses in that. Phil alluded to the work we're doing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I think it's no secret. There's been a number of articles out that the SEC is very interested in moving towards mandatory disclosure of climate. And sometimes they say climate risk, sometimes they say climate emissions. I think risk is an interesting concept in this area, not just for publicly traded companies, but for any entity. There's sort of two sources, right? One is the transition risk. As the economy transitions to a low carbon economy, what are the risks to each financial entity, right? To each producer. and consumer for that matter. So that's one kind of risk. And of course, the other risk is risks of climate impacts themselves. If your refinery is on the Gulf Shore, you are definitely going to be vulnerable to increased storm events, more intense storm events, etc. So the question then becomes, how can we work with the SEC to require these kinds of disclosures of risk? But then there's also the risk in the transition risk part as the economy, EPA, and others clamp down on carbon emissions, methane emissions, N2O emissions. There's going to be cost to dealing with those regulations. And so companies that are already out in front on that score are not going to bear the same high costs as companies that have relatively high emissions per unit of output. And so another goal, I think, from the SEC's point of view is to sort of make sure that investors and publicly traded companies have that information available. So we've been working with them, and then of course, some companies are way out in front. Apple just announced their disclosure of their emissions and challenged other companies to do the same, and challenged the SEC to move forward with a mandatory reporting rule. You may not know, but EPA has actually had a greenhouse gas reporting rule. It's at the facility level for significant facilities for, I think, a decade now. And so it appears to be very doable. We make those emission estimates publicly available for the most part. But there's an interesting problem with this, which is what's important to investors. EPA sort of divides the universe of emissions into three categories: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So Scope 1 emissions are what comes out of your tailpipe, right? Scope 2 are other things that you incur in the process of doing your business. And then Scope 3, which I think is the hardest one, is the emissions in your value chain, both from your suppliers and down use. So if you're making a product that, like refrigerants, you're going to have emissions, or if you're making a product that has very energy intensive inputs to it, that use a lot of carbon to make, like the steel that goes into a refrigerator, what are those emissions from your suppliers? And that's the kind of Scope 3 emissions. And so the challenge, it seems to us, is to sort of how to craft, work with the SEC to craft, regulations that would require this mandatory disclosure, and how big could that scope be, and what's important to investors, and also how can we get investors then to reflect both the risks that I mentioned about, but also for the SEG investor, how can they get a better metric of what are these companies really doing to, are they helping or hurting the greenhouse gas climate change problem? A sort of related thing that we're looking at now is insurance markets, and are they appropriately incorporating the risks to climate change? So if you're a house sitting on the shoreline versus a house on very high land, or a house on the floodplain, et cetera, do insurance markets accurately reflect those climate risks? And then if they do, or if we could get them to do it better, then the incentives to do adaptation and resilience become that much stronger, right? And we're also finding that how do we get in the infrastructure space? There are plenty of examples. We have a study going on showing that, after increased storm flooding events, the probability or the likelihood of drinking water contamination and violations goes up considerably. There's all kinds of stories like that. And so, the question becomes, how do we adapt and make these, important institutions and infrastructure more resilient? And we also have to ask the question, is it, what are the net benefits of adaptation today? So, are you, a little bit of money now to make the thing more resilient? Are you going to, are the benefits, the research suggests right now that the benefits are enormous from adaptation. And so every dollar invested today will definitely save over the long run. And then last but not least, we've gotten involved a little bit with our international colleagues. We've been working with the USTR a little bit, and they're interested in both trade agreements and how we can reflect kind of climate considerations in those. And there was just an interesting study that was published. It turns out that our tariff systems in the world heavily subsidize carbon intensive commodities, right? We tend to put tariffs on things that don't have a lot of carbon embedded in them and tend to not put tariffs on things that are carbon intensive. And so the implied subsidy to carbon is on the order of $80 to $90 a ton. And when the social cost of carbon is right now, it's about $40 a ton expected with updates to the damage functions and things. We could easily see that go higher, but that means the subsidy is in the opposite direction of what it should be by quite a bit. So, with that, I just tried to give a kind of broad scope of the kinds of things we're looking at, but that I think the theme of it is that the challenges are not just to do regulations, although that's certainly part of the scheme, but we want to do this sort of whole government approach, which is a new challenge for EPA. I think we're used to, when we have a particulate matter problem or a NOx problem that Phil talked about, or even an air toxics problem, or a waters loading problem from effluent guidelines, we tend to be a regulatory agency, but this is such a massive problem throughout the whole economy that we're talking about behavioral changes, about making better choices, both from the private sector. And Phil mentioned that we have a sectors group in OP that actually is engaging those sectors directly. We're working with them. We provide a little bit of technical support for some of the things I just mentioned, like the social cost of greenhouse gases. So helping to get industry to use that, insurance, et cetera. So it's a whole portfolio, and it's fairly new to NCE, but we're definitely looking forward to it. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Al, and Philip as well. My goodness, that's much more information than we expected, and we are so appreciative. That's going to prompt a few questions, I believe, and we're okay on time. So put your hands up, and I will move forward on answering. Jeff, you first.
Hi, thanks, Joanne, and thanks very much for that presentation. As Joanne said, it was pretty comprehensive and a lot going on, both at EPA as well as when you think about cross-government. And you touched on a lot of different things, Al, about private side lead pipes. David in the previous presentation talked about small business and big challenge being uptake. And in Rhode Island, we have a pretty successful new program for private side that we work with Providence Water, long-term zero interest loans that frankly address some of these things. But one of the things that we find, I would say, and I'm sure Chris and Jim McGough, probably David Zimmerman is going to agree, when we start looking at residents, small business, and bring it down from the municipal level, a lot of these things, one of the things that really hurts uptake is a lot of the federal crosscutters. And I think that's one of the things from a strategy point of view and a policy point of view EPA needs to think about. Carrie talked about, we talked about green banks earlier. We're part of a green bank network, and everybody was really happy about hearing USDA had a energy efficiency funds for rural areas, and frankly, a lot of places, including most of Rhode Island, is rural. But as some of these smaller CDFIs who are well positioned to help these programs get off the ground start to dig into these federal crosscutters, they just hold up their hands and say, we as organizations can't handle them, much less our customers. So I think from a policy perspective, one of the things that EPA should be looking at is how can we make these programs and access to, efficiently priced funds better for small businesses and residents to help address some of these issues, because I think that's where we'll see more take up. We can just make the programs easier to administer and easier for people to receive funds. So thank you again very much for the presentation.
Okay, David Zimmer.
Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, I wanted to build on what Jeff just said. As an SRF in New Jersey, and I'm sure this is true, just like Jeff said with himself and Chris and Jim McGough, and not just the four of us, but really the 46 of us. One of the value adds that the SRFs often bring to our programs that help make them successful is we take the lift on a lot of these crosscutters. right? So the reporting lift, technical assistance, and we all have different ways of managing it. But as Jeff alluded to, the smaller the entity that we deal with, kind of the bigger these problems become. The less staff they have, the less resources they have, et cetera. So again, kind of building on what Jeff was saying, to the extent that EPA wants to branch out in this kind of mode, one of the things that they really might consider is what kind of assistance, what kind of lift can they take on in this program for making this initiative more successful for smaller people. If you've got an intermediary like the state, and the state has the ability to do that, great. But if you're going to deal directly with participants, you really need to think about how you're going to make it easier instead of just saying, oh, here's the cross cutters, we're going to dump it on you, it's your responsibility.
I think that's a good point. If I could just respond. Yeah, and I think there's some programs that EPA does have that we have specific statutory authority and appropriations for doing so, like the Brownfields program, where there's a lot of training that goes on for small and local water districts, but it's not ubiquitous across all our programs. And that's, I think, something we're looking at now, and really getting technical assistance to, small local governments, community groups on how to access all these other programs, and not just EPA has, but other agencies as well.
Mariana?
Yes, I just wanted to add a little bit to what David said. I oversee the SRF programs here at Idaho as well. Again, we do a lot of hand-holding for our small systems when we have the capacity to do so. With some of the regulations that we have, say Green Project Reserve, we've had some success with that because we were able to educate the systems on maybe different investments and actually do the cost structure for them to say, hey, if you invest in this water pump, even though it's more costly, you're going to be able to recoup in the back end. So that's a little bit of, it seems like, Phil, what you're talking about and some of your stuff. But with any agency, I think kind of streamlining all your guys' programs. I think even within EPA or even within my state agency, we tend to work in silos. And so if there's ways that we can make all our programs somewhat structure similarly, and so it's easier to manage, so we can spend more time doing more of the hand-holding, I think is helpful. I know I manage both the clean water and the drinking water SRF, and they have different rules, regulations. I try to manage them similarly, even if it's a rule on one side and not the other, just because if I ran them completely differently, I don't have the manpower to get in there and do that. So that's just an experience, I think, at the state level that I do. I don't know if that's something that can be brought up at the EPA level. A couple other things I've just kind of heard as well is definitely on the procurement side for government agencies on how they can be able to get equipment that's not necessarily just the cheapest, but definitely the right right investment for the long term. And so I don't know if there's a broader sense of allowing regulations to ease up there and on the procurement side. Overall, I think that's just something I wanted to add to what David said.
Mariana, thank you. I'm going to let Cynthia have the last word, and then I want to pose a question to the group, and then hopefully we'll have time for a quick break.
So just a quick question. Thank you, Joanne. So thanks for the presentation. My question is, so Water Now Alliance, we are a network of local water utility leaders, and we really do focus particularly on small, under-resourced communities and, and addressing EJ and other issues. So we've actually been providing hands-on technical support for a number of communities, starting in the West, really, for federal programs. And we found that that having that kind of NGO partner is enormously beneficial. We've had very significant success helping those communities navigate their way through the federal system. So it'd be great to hear you talk a little bit about the extent to which you've considered NGO partnerships as a way of leveraging additional resources to connect with those communities and address their needs.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I know we're short on time, but we're definitely looking at the grant programs, not just within the Office of Policy and our EJ office and our Office of Community Revitalization, but across the EPA to figure out how all the projects, whether the money goes to a state or local agency or to a community-based organization, that all the projects are community-driven and community-led with community partners. I think that's critical, pretty much not just at EPA, but across the government. And it's a new way of government doing business. There has been success, in that area at EPA with our community-driven solutions program. And there have been really good examples out of the Office of Community Revitalization on sustainable planning, but there's just not enough resources to go around to meet the need. And the good news is there are going to be more resources, right? The American Rescue Package has about $50 million for these type of community projects that are going to help communities on the ground. And 50 million is nowhere near enough either. The American Jobs Package proposes more. The 2022 President's budget proposes a lot more. So hopefully, if Congress can agree, there's going to be a lot more resources going into exactly what you're talking about. And we want to make sure it is community driven and community led and not top down from the federal or even some cases the state level. The communities usually know what they need and what they want better than, especially the federal government can.
Okay, David Zimmer, you still have your hand up. Is that the old question or did you want to make a final comment?
No, I'll put it down. Sorry.
Okay, not a problem. All right, so I want to propose something here. Not seeing any other hands left. And I think there's so much here, and I'm not checking with Al before this, but is there a potential charge somewhere in here that EFAB wants to consider? And if so, Al, would you be interested? You're not recommending anything, but we have cost of capital work group and other things happening. Could this potentially be rolled in or something you'd want to work with us on?
I think we'd be very interested in continuing a dialogue and working with you. We certainly you bring an expertise that the agency just doesn't have. So whether it's on this, how to implement, financing and other kinds of programs to get change in the economy at the commercial level, residential level, et cetera, or even on the SEC work, which I'm fairly confident is going to go forward, but we certainly want to have that right. And so even just looking over our shoulders on where we are, we're probably going to be collaborating directly and on a daily basis with our colleagues at the SEC. And they have more expertise, of course, in the Wall Street world or the financial trading world, but I think we, of course, have better expertise on the environment side, right, and calculations of GHGs, et cetera. So I think having that all come together and having a additional set of eyes help us look through that. Are we missing something, et cetera? And I also raised the concept of risk. Can we go further than just emissions and as a proxy or a representation of climate risks to these companies would be a second question. So I think there is a lot to unpack, but that was my goal.
So Al, what I think we will do, just as an immediate next step, the cost of capital work group, we had some discussions about this yesterday. Chris Meister, if I could ask that there he is waving. So what I'll do is have EPA coordinate with you, Chris, and maybe we invite Al to the next work group meeting. If others outside of the group who have expressed interest in listening to this conversation or just on that initial call, I think as a potential client or something along those lines could be really interesting dialogue. So as a next step, Chris, is that okay if I task you with that? All right. All right, Al, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's going to be a wonderful conversation for sure. So Ed.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Al. As always, so you guys are great, and I know that there was a lot of information, but I think it connects a lot of the information that Phil, you and Al shared really connects to the work that the advisory committee has already been discussing, as Joanne said. So we'll follow up, Joanne, on the meeting. And so now I think we can turn to the next topic, but I think Joanne, you had proposed another short break, but David also still has his hand up. Is it a hand management issue or?
No, I was just gonna jump in here really quickly and say, Joanne, I have a particular interest in just this piece of capital. So if when Elle joins the call with Chris, can you invite me on that? Because I don't know what this might look like going forward. But again, even if it's its own or it's a sub piece of what Chris and the group are working on, I'd like to jump in on this, okay?
David, you're very much like Ashley. She's jumping in on all the things. So that's wonderful. We appreciate the enthusiasm and the interest. Absolutely. And I encourage the rest who are not on the cost of capital group. That initial call will be quite exciting with Al and Philip. So I think others would be allowed to the extent we could have enough of a group, a size group with the limitations on there. So let's include you, David, and thank you very much. Now, I know we talked about a little break in between, but I do not want to keep David Bloom waiting, and I know he's probably pressed for time. So,
would you like a 5-minute break?
It is David.
I think David probably needs a 5-minute break.
Okay,
too.
as long as he promises not to go anywhere. Everybody's got 5 minutes. It's a good time stretch. Bye.
Hello, Joanne.
Hello, Ed.
So I think we are a minute away. So we'll give a chance to others to come back.
Okay.
Hey, David, really glad you could join us. I know that it was administrators hearing on the Hill this morning, so I appreciate you making time for us.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so we'll wait a minute, and then Joanne, I'll quickly introduce David, and we can go.
Perfect.
And I'll keep the introduction short because everybody knows David.
Well, David, get ready. We're going to have a lot of good questions for you.
Yes, yes.
I'll do my best in answering them.
Okay, I hope everyone's back. So we're going to get started again, and let's get started. I want to welcome David Bloom, our EPA's acting Chief Financial Officer, and you all of you have his bio available to you as well. But the only thing that I want to point out is that, well, first of all, he's one of our most distinguished senior executives. So he's hitting. You're the cleanup batter because we've had several on this call last 2 days. And then David, I think, also has a distinction of having served as the acting Chief Financial Officer probably for the longest number of years across many administrations, which says a lot about David's ability to manage EPA's tremendous resources, or tremendously tiny resources at times, that we like to talk about. Anyway, so let me turn it over to David. And for those of you that do not know, the administrator also testified this morning on a budget hearing. So I suspect that David will have something to share with us about that as well. So let me turn it over to you, David. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ed. And I just want to thank you for inviting me today to give an update on EPA's budget. And I want to thank the EFAB for allowing me this time. It's been a number of years since I have joined this group. And for just a little historical sake, EFAB used to be under OCFO. So the work that you do is near and dear and very much appreciated from this office. On Friday, April 9th, the administration submitted the president's priorities for fiscal year 2022 discretionary spending to the Congress. And the discretionary request will help shape and inform the Congress's work as they begin this FY22 appropriations season. It reflects one piece of the president's broader agenda, and it complements proposals included in a separate American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure package that you're hearing so much about these days. The full FY 2022 budget will be released next month in May, and it will present a unified, comprehensive, and economically and fiscally responsible plan to address the overlapping challenges the country is facing. But first, I wanted to provide some highlights with respect to the American Jobs Plan. So in March, the president released this plan. It is designed to put millions of people to work and lay the foundation for economic growth for decades to come by investing in infrastructure. Infrastructure in the 21st century extends far beyond just roads and bridges. It also means investing in drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, cleaning up and restoring our land, and investing in programs to reduce air pollution for our children. The plan proposes over $100 billion in additional EPA funding, more than 10 times the agency's current annual budget. $111 billion is to be invested in water infrastructure, including a $45 billion investment to replace 100% of lead service lines and pipes through the EPA's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and water infrastructure improvements for the Nations Act, or WIN grants. Replacing lead service lines is vital for public health, and yet EPA estimates that 6 to 10 million homes in the US and up to 400,000 schools and daycare centers have lead service lines. The plan also provides $10 billion in funding to monitor and remediate PFAS in drinking water and to invest in rural small water systems and household well and wastewater systems, including drainage fields. Communities located within 1 mile of Superfund sites are disproportionately communities of color and low income. To address this issue, the American Jobs Plan proposes a $5 billion investment in the remediation and redevelopment of brownfield and Superfund sites, as well as related economic and workforce development programs. In addition, to help reduce emissions from school buses to improve the health for the children who ride them, the drivers, the people around school bus loading areas, and the communities in which they operate, the plan proposes to electrify at least 20% of all school buses. And these EPA investments are just part of an even broader set of federal investments. Now just turning to the discretionary budget that was outlined by the administration to Congress last month. It includes a request for $11.2 billion for EPA. This is the largest budget request in the agency's history, and nearly a $2 billion increase above current levels. While this is a historic budget, much of the increase supports funding for needs in all communities. The focus of the budget is on the president's priorities of tackling climate change, accelerating environmental justice, investing in water infrastructure, and supporting the core mission to ensure we have the people to help those across the country. Let me just highlight a few particulars that were outlined in this document. Additional funding is provided for EPA's Office of Air and Radiation to build back staff expertise, analysis, and capacity to implement climate change programs through the Clean Air Act. This will enable EPA to tackle climate change, bolster state climate programs, prioritize climate research at the agency, and invest in resilient infrastructure across the United States. The budget also addresses climate change with the urgency science demands by investing over $1.8 billion across all our programs to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, address environmental justice, and create good paying jobs at the same time. In addition, money is also being provided to support the administration's priority to provide environmental justice for low income and marginalized communities who have been overburdened with air pollution and other environmental hazards. The discretionary request invests approximately over $900 million towards a new environmental and economic justice initiative that will help create good paying jobs, clean up pollution, implement the President's Justice 40 initiative, and advance racial equity, and secure environmental justice for communities who too often have been left behind, including rural and tribal communities. The budget also provides additional funding to overall the EPA External Civil Rights Compliance Office, helping to ensure that the President's equity commitments are fulfilled and complement environmental justice investments elsewhere in the discretionary request. $3.6 billion is included to invest in critical water infrastructure projects, which represents an increase of over $600 million over the FY21 enacted levels. These funds will be used to advance efforts to replace lead service lines and household wastewater systems, as well as broader efforts to improve drinking water and wastewater infrastructure while creating good paying construction jobs across the nation. As you may know, the loss of nearly 1,000 staff over the past years has impacted the agency's ability to carry out its core duties and functions to protect public health and the environment. In addition to helping to build back staff, the request also invests in rebuilding programmatic capabilities that focus on protecting our air, land, and water by helping to prevent and clean up hazardous waste and other environmental damage that harms communities and poses a risk to public health and safety. To address these issues, specifically in the Superfund program, $882 million is being allocated for the cleanup program to help deal with some of the nation's most contaminated land, reduce emissions of toxic substances and greenhouse gases from existing and abandoned infrastructure, and respond to environmental emergencies, oil spills, and natural disasters. Importantly, as part of the President's commitment to tackling PFAS pollution, the discretionary request provides approximately $75 million to accelerate toxicity studies and research to inform the regulatory development of designating PFAS as hazardous substances and setting enforceable limits for PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Money will also be made available for grants for technical assistance as state and local governments deal with PFAS contamination. This is just a very high level of some of the key components found in the American Jobs Plan and the discretionary budget request for EPA. In addition, most recently, the enacted American Rescue Plan included $100 million for EPA, and we are currently working to determine the best way to allocate those funds to advance environmental justice and conduct air monitoring work pursuant to the law. Additional details will be available in the months ahead. And with respect to the agency's current FY 2021 budget, Congress passed our appropriation in late December, totaling $9.2 billion for the agency. This represented a $179 million increase over last year, the FY 2020 levels, with most of the increases concentrated in the agency's external funding programs that support state, local, and tribal entities. Specifically, the geographic water programs increased almost $32 million, and the state and tribal assistance grants increased $68 million from last year. Within these levels, WIFIA is funded at $65 million, a $5 million increase. The state revolving funds are funded at $1.638 billion for the Clean Water SRF and $1.126 billion for the Drinking Water SRF, equal to the FY 2020 levels. These amounts will contribute to the more than $189 billion in financial assistance the EPA has already provided over the history of the SRFs via the states to nearly 43,000 water quality infrastructure projects and 16,500 drinking water projects, creating over 300,000 jobs in the last 2 years alone. Through the Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act, the WIFIA loan program, EPA has provided $9 billion in credit assistance to help finance more than $19 billion for water infrastructure while creating nearly 47,000 jobs and saving ratepayers $4 billion. So on that note, I want to just thank you for inviting me to speak with you today, and I would be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. A lot of good information. And as chair, I'm going to take the first question. So yesterday we had your colleague, Lek Cadelli. He was wonderful. He opened with a quote by Alfred Lloyd Tennyson. It was just looking into the future. It was a great segue into looking your strategic planning process. And the group just had tons of comments. They had so many wonderful comments and feedback. There's something there with this board and so many great ideas. And I'm wondering, and I'm not sure what it could look like, but I'm wondering, is there an opportunity to maybe be part of that? I think you're calling it strategic foresight. Is there a way we could be part of it to somehow respond and collect our feedback, somehow respond in a letter, some way influence this, because there's so much collective wisdom on this group that we could be part of that process. So I haven't checked with my colleagues here on the board, but is there maybe an opportunity there?
Well, first of all, I did speak with Lek yesterday, and he said you all were extremely engaged, and a half-hour session turned into an hour. So I hope you all didn't go too much over your scheduled time. I think it's wonderful that you all have this interest and desire to share some thoughts. I would say absolutely, we would love to hear from you. The whole point of the strategic foresight effort is to get people's thoughts as to where they think we will be going down the road, so that can influence not only the strategic plan, but also how we then implement our programs. And so if what you all would like to do is provide a letter, we would welcome that. If there's another format, I'm sure we can work with Ed and figure out what the best way is to collect your great thought process in terms of what you see down the road that could help benefit the agency and the work that we do.
All right.
Joanne, if I can just interject,
Yes.
I think one of the reason that the group was so energetic was I think that Lek actually posed a few questions on his final slide yesterday. And one possible suggestion that possible path forward is, as we're doing with Al, perhaps a few of the interested members could engage with Lek more of as an informal kind of an early engagement to see what specifically that this particular board could provide as an input and advice to David and OCFO in their planning process. Because my understanding from my conversations with Lek and David is that they're going to be planning engagement with other groups as well. So the question, I think, is really about, as David said, what specific things that it aligns with the expertise and the interest of this group that could also help with the foresight process. So I think that may take a little more than just a kind of a one conversation, but it may be more extensive engagement initially with Lek and Kathy and perhaps with David as well. But so I recommend the process that you kind of created based on our SOPs, like the one that you just created for Al, which is sort of, it's a similar kind of situation here. Anyway, just food for thought.
No, that's great. And just so David's aware, he posed about 4 questions, and we focused more specifically on one, which was what are the key forces or developments that you think might affect environmental finance over the next 20 years? And that's what everybody started to engage on. So there are opportunities, and instead of spending more time on that suggestion, because I want to be able to get to some of the hands raised, please put in the chat if you think it's a good idea or suggestions of how we could potentially coordinate that effort. I'd love to hear from you. And while we see to that, I'm going to call on Ted Chapman for a question or comment.
Joanne, thank you. Ted Chapman, S&P Global Ratings. David, one of the things that I think has helped in the past for at least outside people getting a glimpse behind the curtain of the forward-looking aspect of what EPA does, the strategic planning, if you will, is periodically, I think typically it's been every 4 years, there's been needs assessment surveys for drinking water and for the clean watersheds. I know that budget priorities and other priorities have maybe delayed some of those. Do those look like they'll be back into either this or future budgets anytime soon?
To your point, if my recollection is correct, I think it's been since 2016, since the last needs survey. And so there's no question it's due. Clearly, we know there's a huge need out there. I believe it's over 700 billion nationwide, but getting updated information makes sense. I don't know where Office of Water is on that. So that's something we can follow up and get back to you through Ed and the environmental finance team.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
David, if you have just a minute, I'm going to check if there's any more questions from the team. And let me see. I have Brent Anderson.
Thanks, Joanne. David, thanks much for giving us that very brief and very thorough analysis of what's going on. It's just an idea here. This seems to me to be a more immediate exercise, right? This is the here and now as opposed to yesterday's discussion, which was temporally more extensive. And so the question I pose to the board is, do we need to reconcile those, or do we have two distinct activities? And I don't have an answer on that, but I wanted to throw that out for some thought and consideration.
It's interesting because when you look at what I spoke to today, with the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure proposal by the administration, that really is thinking a little longer term in terms of the time horizon. I think in the 5 to 10 year range, I'm not quite sure exactly. Whereas when you start talking about the annual appropriations process, sort of what do we get in a given year and what do we do in that given year? They definitely complement each other, especially when you see the kind of funding associated in the job plan vis-a-vis the similar programs that we get on an annual basis with respect to the funding. But you can't lose sight of what are your ultimate goals, what are you trying to accomplish, and that's where the development of the strategic plan and the discussion you had yesterday on strategic foresight, you do need to think longer term as to where are you trying to head, what are you trying to accomplish, and I think especially in the climate space, you're going to hear some pretty bold proposals by the president this week as part of the climate summit, where he's going to have some aggressive goals for this country. And EPA certainly is part of that effort in terms of our portfolio of activities and what we can do to not only within our space, but to work with other federal partners and our international partners in accomplishing that. So it's all related, but yeah, you look at each of these pieces of when you talk about budget, well, are we talking about today or are we talking about near, in the midterm, or are we talking long term? And you have to put it in that context, and then, but not lose sight of, you got to get the work done today. And so what is it that you have to do today? But you still need to know that you have an ultimate goal to get to over the long term. So the fact that you all had some really interesting thoughts yesterday, and I look forward to more in the financing space, I think that's going to become, such an important issue as it always has been, because dollars are sometimes limited. I mean, you could put as much money as you possibly wanted at EPA, and the price still wouldn't be enough, because as we just, as we identified, the need survey in the water space is almost $1 trillion. And you start adding up all the different other elements, it's quite costly, and yet you don't have unlimited resources. So you do have to think sometimes differently. And the other piece to this, and the budget really emphasizes this, is we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of all the communities in this country, not those who have benefited, but those who haven't necessarily in the ways that we would want them to. And whether they are disadvantaged or rural or tribal communities, they need to be part of the equation as well. And there's that strong emphasis there. So we really need to factor that in. So I gave a lot of backdrop to your question, and hopefully that gave a little more context to it.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that real quick, because that's great insight there. And what I'm thinking is what's outlined in the budget is more immediate, more quantitative, more specific. And while it temporally may be near to midterm, I think the question we have for ourselves is, how do we take and then segue that into the longer term goals for, we talked about durable change. How do we take and have this kind of durable change that we can help affect, and what can our role be in helping do that? That becomes the question for me.
Sure.
David, if you can allow us one more question from Cynthia.
Alrighty.
Thanks. Hi, David. I'm Cynthia Kohler with Water Now Alliance. We are a network of local water utility leadership. And I just wanted to start with a quick note of thanks. The American Jobs Plan, the focus on environmental justice, climate resilience, these are all very positive, very welcome, and to use your word, very bold new developments. As you know, most funding for water infrastructure occurs at the local level, the vast majority. Given the COVID pandemic and the economic downturn, local governments, whether it's cities or counties or special districts, have just faced enormous revenue shortfalls, huge challenges. And as you're thinking about these increases in funding at the federal level, can you share with us what thinking, if any, has gone into how much of that can be converted into grants versus loans? I think we're all very, very grateful for the low interest loans the federal government has provided and is planning to expand. But there is a lot of interest in the world that I travel in whether there can be, at least in the near term, some thinking about that conversion, and certainly for the more under-resourced communities.
Sure. I'll just say, certainly in the American Jobs Plan, I think there's more opportunity working with Congress to see what direction the decisions are made in terms of what the final outcome would be when you talk about loans versus grants. Certainly in our annual appropriation, we know there's set-asides associated with allowing grants. And it's a matter of evaluating what the needs are out there and then determining what we can do within the laws that we have to work under. There's no question that's an important part of the equation that you've outlined. And it's really just understanding that and then having the appropriate conversations and coming to the best outcome. Because clearly you want to help those communities who are in most need. And it's tough. At the same time, we know that the SRF program, the beauty of the program is its revolving nature, and that means you need to continue to have the money turn over, and so you can't lose sight of that part of the equation. But you still have to recognize, to your point, what the needs are and how can you best meet them. I don't definitely have the answers. Clearly, those are part of the conversations that need to happen. And I'm sure Office of Water is having those conversations now as they think through how we best support, especially those disadvantaged communities, those rural communities, those tribal communities who are probably in most need at this point in time and have always had challenges.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, David, it was a pleasure to see you again virtually, and thanks for all you're doing for EPA and for the communities. Ed, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, hey, David, thank you, as usual. Great to see you, and great to hear that everything went well today, behind the scenes. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Take care.
All right, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye, David.
Okay, Joanne. So I think we're at the last agenda item before we go to public comments. And I understand that we do have 5 people signed up for the public comment period. So we'll have to leave some time for that. But I think we have now plenty of time. Because as I asked everyone at the end of the day yesterday, Tara Johnson prepared a nice table for this last agenda item, where this is going to be another standing item that Joanne and I talked about having at our EFAB meetings, where based on your feedback, I think you expressed a deep interest in knowing that the advice that you offer the agency and the work that you do has some impact, not some, a great impact on the agency. So what we are going to do now is to try to provide you updates of what's happened with the advice and recommendations that you've offered to the agency. And so if you refer to the document, if you had a chance to look at it, if you didn't, you can still follow along, but I'm not going to get into the details of it because there's a lot of information in there. But we have an update for you for 5 set of recommendations that you've made, and going back to April of 2019. So many of you did not have any actual contributions to this, but I know that many of the members here have, at least I wouldn't say old, but the previous board members, the extended board members, have had a great deal to do with these recommendations that were offered to EPA. And so what Tara has done is reviewed not only the recommendations and advice that you offered, both in general and specifically, and in a table format, put updates in terms of what EPA has done in response to you in a general term overview, overarching kind of response. You always get a response saying, thank you very much. But I think you wanted a little more than that. So if you go into the table, you'll see there are some specific actions that EPA is taking or has taken that follows the outline. So the first is on the consultation, just going in a chronologically reverse order. The first one is on the consultation on financing and governance options for Backhaul Alaska program. Now, this was a very, as you will recall, this was a very extensive and extended engagement that EFAB had on this project. And I think, Joanne, you probably spent several years on this particular project. And so
it felt like it.
This was, but it was a very great project to the extent of EPA's engagement back with the board. You'll recall they kept coming back and not only responding to what the advice that you all have offered, but also kept coming back to get additional refinements. And I think what that particular document describes is basically, to me, a great outcome. And I think it's still work that's going on in Alaska. And those of you who have not been involved in this project, it was really a significant problems for Alaskan villages because they could not get, there was no funding or financing available to get the trash back out from these villages once all the consumer products and everything went into those villages. It's easy for Amazon and other folks to fly things up there into these villages, but once the trash gets accumulated, I think it's really hard to get back out. Anyway, so that's the first project. The second one was evaluating stormwater infrastructure funding and financing. Now, this was a huge project, and the bottom line on this is the agency is still working on the report. So you'll see the updates there, and we can have a little more discussion around that. The other is the revenue options for waste backhaul. It's the same thing. You see there's two recommendations on the backhaul project that the advisory committee made in 2019 and 2020. And then in June of 2019, a decision maker's guide to alternative service delivery options for public utility projects. And going back to April of 2019, is the financing strategies for promoting promoting system regionalization. I think that those are for smaller rural systems, drinking water systems. That there was that was also, I believe, a huge undertaking in terms of report outs and so on. So that's what it is. And Joanne, as I said, I'm not sure how much time you want to spend on this, but I'll turn it to you for a discussion around that, because I'm not sure I want to go over every action item on the table.
Right. So a couple points on that, Ed. So first of all, this is the first time in my memory of EFAB that we have had, besides a thank you very much, and here's a quick update, a more extensive listing of what's happened. And that makes all the difference. It really does, because this team worked so hard on each of these reports and these projects, and to see, what happened afterward, this is very meaningful. So thank you to EPA for thinking about putting it more substantially in this report, the summary. But also we took some different approaches with these projects. This was, for backhaul, that was just such an exciting opportunity, something so different. And I'm saying this for the new members to hear. We first took on that charge and everybody said, listen, we don't have experience and that expertise for this issue, but yet we came together. We used a couple different processes to get to the recommendations. And, that day we locked ourselves away together to rotate sections and take each topic. Was a fantastic way to embrace some of the expertise of this group. The regionalization, pulling folks in for a workshop and locking ourselves away again on a separate from EFAB, just to be in person together and a workshop process. Very exciting. The stormwater, as some of the members know, that was very extensive. A lot went into that, but we were able to use consultants, 19 different consultants outside that helped us and guided our process. So it made us feel like we were part of a team. So that was just, reading the feedback here and what's happened. I really do appreciate it as chair to see something like this. And so I've spoken enough. I just want to open it up to anyone else who has a question or comment they want to make on this on this response from EFAB's advice.
Just a quick comment before we turn to everyone else. I think Bill Stannard just asked a question about the stormwater report, and if you'll see, I think it's on page 2 or 3 that it's in the second part of the report out here that EPA report to Congress is still development as of March 2021, and I don't know whether Tara there's an update, but I suspect not, that it's still in development. And just one more thing to just emphasize here is that I think from a FACA perspective, this is also something that's it's going to be useful going forward because it creates a tremendous amount of transparency in terms of the work that you're doing and the products that you're delivering, as well as advice and offer of recommendations and what EPA is actually doing about them. And if there are certain things that we can't do, I mean, it'll be highlighted as well. And what this will be good for also the new members, as Joanne said, is that there are many different approaches in offering recommendations and advice to EPA. And the Alaska backhaul consultation, I thought, was a very innovative way of dealing with a intractable problem that the advisory committee was facing, that, you know, we didn't have a set of recommendations that could perhaps be direct. And I think there was a lot of information gathering at that meeting that really helped, I think, the board to deliberate. So I really recommend, particularly the new members, to kind of go back and look at the reports and then look at how the agency is reacting. And one other thing, Joanne, to point out is that the last time that, you know, this board has been around for decades now. And the last time that we produced as a EPA staff, the compendium of the work was in 2010, and that's still available on our website of all the recommendations and actions that were taken prior to 2010. We haven't done one since then, but this is the type of thing that I think going forward that we can continue to update on our website, so that in a digital world, we may not have to produce a kind of a compendium every decade. I mean, should be something that should be available on a real-time basis for people. So that's a lengthy way of saying, Joanne, I really, as a DFO, appreciate the feedback that I got from all of you. Basically, some level of frustration that you weren't seeing kind of a feedback as quickly and in a substantive basis. So that is allowing us to kind of move towards this kind of reporting back. So hopefully this is what we'll do going forward. So thank you for the suggestions and pushing us.
We have a couple questions, but I do want to acknowledge Tara Johnson again, because she's been putting her heart and soul into keeping us on track and moving us forward. So a shout out to her again. Hey, David Zimmer, you're up.
Yes. So certainly thank you to all the folks at EPA that made this happen. But Ed, I really want to thank you, because I know that in the creation of this report, you were really the driver behind it. And as you realize that this was a passionate issue for some of us a year and a half ago, whatever. So to the extent that you picked up the torch, you heard our voice, this is a wonderful report. As Joanne said, it absolutely makes all the difference in the world. In the time that we spend on this board and the efforts that we put in to know that we're making a difference in a very specific way, it's all we ask for. So to you personally, thank you very, very much for overseeing this.
You're here. Thank you, David. Eric.
Just real quick, first of all, I'd like to echo the same sort of thanks. And it is very gratifying. And further to, I guess, the point is, like, for example, on the regionalization stuff, I see that there is a proposed water system restructuring rule that will address, reflects many of the recommendations that we put forward in our report, and would just, I'm hoping that we can get sort of updates on how that rule is being framed, and then what we might be able to do to provide any help in terms of implementation.
Thank you, Eric. Jan.
Yeah, I was actually going to note the same thing because I think, as we know, there's very different interpretations around regionalization and consolidation. So I think actually, providing some feedback or input to that would be helpful. But I just want to echo everybody. This was really useful. It reminds me a lot of a revise and resubmit form you get. When you submit an article or a book, you get that feedback. And then to me, what that also identifies is possibilities for future research where, for example, that's how I read it. I was like, oh, this is great. But then there's still these issues that might need another focused effort. So I think it could be really useful for us in that respect too, and for EPA to identify, okay, this was great, but let's think about next steps or smaller, perhaps even follow-on projects to fill some gaps.
Okay, Jan, thank you. And Craig Holland.
Thanks. Absolutely, always echo everything that everyone said, especially David. Thank you for putting this all together and for giving us the opportunity to make meaningful change in the world. One thing that I wanted to note that was a great outcome of the stormwater financing charge is that one of our recommendations was to create a low-income assistance program for water utilities. And that recommendation actually made it into the CARES Act and was passed into law. And I think it was a week or two ago, I got an email for a webinar from the Department of Health and Human Services on rolling out that program. So, we are making meaningful impact on this board. And I have to say, personally and professionally, the fact that we could take a recommendation and turn it into a $700 million allocation from Congress to help people with their water bills is truly gratifying for me. So personally, so thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Craig. I think the board is very proud of all of their accomplishments and gets them excited and moving forward to part of these charges.
And rightly so, Joanne. And I really commend all the work that I know that people all of you put a lot of time and effort in the work group meetings and so on. And I see that when I attend those meetings. And Joanne, you and I see that firsthand. And so the final thing that at least I want to add at this point on this is that I think Jan pointed out, another use for this type of document is to see whether or not you want to revisit or extend certain advice and recommendations that you've given in the past. But what I will say is that going forward, the idea of prioritizing your work will become increasingly important, particularly how quickly the administration has gotten started, or this administration has gotten started on the work on the priorities now, as you heard from all the speakers. And one of the purposes for putting an agenda together like this meeting was also not only to kind of, we're at a point, I think the group is at a point picking up new work. Joanne and I had a little sidebar about how busy you're going to be, but also prioritizing then and narrowing perhaps the scope of future work. And I think how the agency deals with the past work should inform your decision making in setting your priorities and how you might want to take on new work as well, because there's going to be plenty of, I think, advice and recommendations and engagement that the agency will need from you. The question is, how does it fit into the work that you do and align nicely with the expertise that you bring? And Joanne mentioned the consultants and other help, and we can provide that as well. And the client offices are the ones that end up providing a lot of expertise and consultants. And the stormwater report was something that was because it was a report to Congress, very much a high priority item for the Office of Water as a client office. And so these 2 days, I mean, you've already expressed an interest in the strategic foresight work. You've expressed an interest in going forward with the cost of capital work group, perhaps aligned with Office of Policy's work with Al. And those are just the two things. And then, of course, you expressed an interest in the P2 work, So there's already 3 different projects. And so one recommendation that I have is looking at these past products and EPA's ability to respond to them as a sort of another guiding post about how and what you should take up in the future. So that's my kind of a use that I would like to see this being used by the board members as well.
Love it. Ted Hennepin?
I just echoing all this, but have you given any thought, can we share this, or is there a way to share this with the expert consultants we had on the stormwater group? And that was a significant size group, and I think they'd be fascinated with seeing what's happening with this.
Yeah, Ted, remember everything that is being shared with you is publicly available, and it'll be posted on our website as well. And we're happy to, if that's a request that we explicitly send the information out, we're happy to do that as well. I know that Tara's listening in on this call.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if we sent it, if you took the action to send it out to them.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to second that, because I often hear from some of the consultants asking where we are and what's the status, and they did put in quite a bit of time. So it'd be great to follow up with this, seeing it's a public document. So with that, I don't see any other hands raised. Again, I just want to thank Ed. Oh, Chris, you're sorry. You just got to unmute and speak up.
Sorry, just one last thing. I know just sort of building on to the comment of sharing with consultants, and I think I'll do it, but I know that a couple of our former colleagues, Lisa Daniel and Richard Weiss, were integral to the alternative delivery. And again, just sort of to keep that in mind, that this is a years-long effort, and so we've had colleagues that have cycled on and off, and just to recognize their contributions.
Oh, Chris, that's an excellent point. With backhaul too, we had 2 different groups working on that. So you're absolutely right. Boy, Tara, your plate is getting full, but we're here to support you and help you in any way we can. All right, so Ed, looking at the time, we're a little ahead of schedule, but I know people might not be on for public comment. So what do you propose we do? You're muted, Ed.
I just realized we do have a couple of commenters already online. So if it's okay with you and the board members, we can start with 2 commenters are already online. If you all are okay, at least those of you I can see, you just give me a thumbs up. All right, we're good to go. So we'll start the public comment period and come back to when others show up, because we did say that we did have a time for them. So at least the couple of people who are online, I'll get to you now. So for the public comment period, we have 3 minutes per person. And what I'll do is I'll ask you to introduce yourself and your affiliation. And I will keep time, and I will start the 3-minute after your introduction and your affiliation, so that I don't take away from your comment period. So the first person is, I hope I get her name right, Sylvia Ordonio with Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. Are you online?
I am. I'm here.
Perfect, Sylvia. So you are welcome to start anytime.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here. I was here in October, and so I'm glad to be able to have a chance to follow up with some comments. So I want to begin with just acknowledging what I heard Chair Thoreau say yesterday about how she thinks that EFAB is the best EPA board. I want to challenge that and say that I think that's me, Jack. And I actually am proud and honored to be able to serve as the current chair of NEJAC. And so I'm also coming to you today because I think that I'm really delighted to hear about a lot of the work that this board is doing. And I think that a lot of what you're doing, again, is very much in line with what it is that the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council has been talking about for many years, right? And so we're really just, thrilled about what's also happening in this current administration to prioritize environmental justice and climate justice in terms of what we also are needing in our communities and have needed for so long. And so I want to also echo what my steering committee member, Dr. Jacoby Wilson, said yesterday about the need to make sure that in all of these conversations, as we're talking about infrastructure and priorities and how we're going to be doing these kind of financial investments, that we have to really look at what have been these longstanding issues in our environmental justice communities. And so we say this not just as another thing that should be aspirational, but that we actually have to get at those outcomes that we've needed for many years, and seeing that this is the opportunity to do that, to get it. And so I'm asking, as you all are looking at the working groups that you're doing, for one, to consider where it is that there could be opportunities for NEJAC members to participate on those working groups as well. So we're looking very closely what's happening in other FACAs as well. And I'm also proud to be a member of the Great Lakes Advisory Board FACA. And so we're looking at these issues in many different ways. And so all of the conversations you've shared here about what's happening in urban, rural, suburban, tribal, other territories is very salient again to the work of NEJAC. And so I think that we've got a lot that we can also offer by way of promoting the kind of understandings that I hear you seeking, and also to make sure that we're integrating them with the priorities of Administrator Regan and the President. And so we were very proud to be able to meet with Administrator Regan on March 24th when he came to NEJAC meeting and told us again about a lot of the work that he's doing and the different offices of NEJAC. But we know that there's a lot of work that we're all undertaking. And so we're figuring it also makes sense to work more smartly if we can also kind of work collaboratively in some of our working groups. So I've also submitted some written comments related to some of the things that I've heard you all saying. I've participated listening in all 8 hours of your EFAB meetings. And so I've enjoyed it and learned a lot myself. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it is that we can work together in better, stronger ways to really get at the issues of our EJ communities and make sure that we're working in the best ways possible. So thank you.
Ed, may I respond to Sylvia?
Absolutely. In fact, she finished 30 seconds ahead of time. I have not seen that. That's amazing, Sylvia. I really appreciate that. Go ahead, Joanne.
Well, Sylvia, welcome back. Thank you for taking the time, first of all, to come listen to our entire meeting and be able to find that there are synergies between our two groups. And thank you for your commitment to environmental justice and the work you're doing. So I hand the prize to you. You've exceeded anything that I could certainly do, and keep on doing the great work. And I'm sure this group will find ways to better connect in the future. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you for that. And if I could just follow up, I heard someone noted that they would be interested in learning more about what it means to have impact communities. And just again, if you're not already aware, the staff over at the Office of Environmental Justice are fabulous and are very much about being convicted to providing that kind of information and working alongside different stakeholder groups. So I know at any time they'd welcome the invitation.
Thank you. And we look forward to your written comments, reading them very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sylvia. And Joanne, just a point of information. Phil's office is where the Environmental Justice Program resides in, as well as the Office of the Community Redevelopment. So perhaps next time we engage with them, this is a conversation that we can follow up with.
See how beneficial your time has already been, Sylvia. Thank you. That's great, Ed.
All right, so we'll go to the next commenter who's already online. Joseph Briefman with Universal Research and Development Enterprise. Joseph, are you on? You are on.
I hope you hear me. Yesterday you did not.
Yeah. So Joseph, if you could just introduce yourself and your affiliation again. I said it, but you can do that. And then as soon as you start, I'll start the clock and you have 3 minutes of comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm president and CEO of company Universal Research and Development Enterprise. We are registered federal contractors working with DOD, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, but we're not known by you guys. I hardly ever participate in panels or anything like that. What I will tell you now, and I'm coming to point, is shocking. It's extremely unusual. But it's very real. It's a real project, real gigantic theoretical discovery in physics, what we use now for environmental, water management, hard accumulation, threatening environment, and all of that stuff. And we are bringing system to the United States within 2 months to Wisconsin. Anyway, what it is, we call it wasteless civilization. and we call it, and we're making statements that anything related to waste or water to be treated or anything supposed to be, and it's shocking, profitable business, not expense. And the simple issue we address that everything what considered to be waste or environmental hazard is materials. We simply did not use it effectively. We have technology based on new physics. We are not working chemical or biological agents. It's electromagnetic new power field, what is addressing elementary particles of substance. Doesn't matter what it is, organic, non-organic, mix of organic and non-organic. It's extremely inexpensive. It doesn't require big buildings, doesn't require too much land. It's bring everything in the end as reusable high quality materials, organic and non-organic, and allow in 6 to 8 months to be paid for whatever you install. It has almost no personnel. A system with 25 cubic meters productivity per hour need one technician once or twice a day for 30 minutes. That's about it. I send material to you guys in response to your emails. It's a huge piece. Me and my partner, Dr. David Garman, until lately head of water faculty of Wisconsin University and head of water scientists of the world organization for 10 years. We signed that material and make it publicly available. It's a huge explanation need to be given to you guys, but it's time for you guys to know it because it will change everything what humans do in industry and personal life. Cleaner, cheaper, and reusable all the way, practically 99%. And I repeat, profit is what is driven this technology. And issue environment, we are addressing. We are lately talking to Office of Assistant of Secretary of Energy on environment. We are working with that office. We are working with DOD. We are working with top research people in Department of Agriculture. So anybody need more information than I can give you in 3 minutes? Materials are there. You can read it. And you can call me and I will try my best to answer or ask Dr. Garman or some of my scientists to address the issue. So 3 minutes, I think I did not even
You
use
did.
it.
You actually, I was just gonna interrupt you, but you did a great job in 3 minutes. And I know all the materials that Joseph has referred to, it's going to be made available to everyone, to the public as well, to the board members. So thank you, Joseph, for joining us today.
If I may, we had very unusual session 3 months ago. We had international real-time demonstration of the system between Australia, Europe, and America. And it was in real time, and it was a panel of 12 professors from universities of Australia, Ukraine, and the United States who observed the demonstration, and we can send that video to you guys too. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So we did, we are way ahead of time, obviously. So Joanne, I will defer to you how you want to handle it, but I do think that we should come back in a few minutes because I think the original time for public comments, we still have 3 commenters, I think, who have not shown up, but we asked them to be here at 2:50. So what I could do is we're going to keep an eye on when they join, but I'll leave it to you in terms of how you want to handle the remaining time that we have.
Well, I think everybody could use a little break, but we do need to come back, please, to hear the public comment. We have a few more coming. So at that point, how about we log in at
how about in 10 minutes?
In 10 minutes. That sounds great. Okay, please come back, everybody, on time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay. Uh,
Hi, Ed.
Hello.
I'm here.
I'm here as well. So I don't know if any other commenters have joined. I think we have a phone number that we see that we don't recognize. Has any public commenter joined our call? Okay, hearing no answer, I think, Joanne, we could close our meeting for the day.
Oh, wow. All right. Just want to remind everyone that tomorrow is Earth Day. I don't think anyone has forgotten that. And the theme is Restore Our Earth, if you didn't know that. So do something special for this Earth. And you've already done it in the last 2 days in preparation. Honestly, you've given so much of your time and your thoughts, great thoughts and ideas, and we really appreciate it. And this is my last official full board meeting, and I can't thank all of you enough, but I'll be hearing from you. You'll be hearing from me, I'll be hearing from you, and let the next 2 months be busy. Okay, Ed, you can close us out.
Obviously, thank you, Joanne. I know this isn't the last time we're going to see you on this call, so we'll be back for the hopefully for a transition call before you expire. But I just want to thank everyone, and you know that every day is Earth Day here at EPA. So not just once a year. So we're celebrating all week here in Region 7. And I hope, as Joanne said, that you go out and do something healthy for Mother Earth tomorrow on Earth Day. But just before I close, once again, I want to thank you for your great participation. And I thought that we were going to suffer from Zoom fatigue for 2 days, but it didn't turn out to be that way, which is really a testament to your interest and your passion for the work that we're doing on the board. So thank you for that. As a follow-up, I've been mentioning that all the deliberations are going to be available publicly as well as to you. And Joanne, once Joanne approves the meeting notes will be published and published for you as well and sent out to you. And what we're going to do is also have some follow-up. I think we have at least 3 groups of folks who were interested in following up on new activities in addition to the opportunity zone work as well. So we have some action items going forward for our next meeting, and so you'll be hearing from us. And now I don't know if Tara's on the phone and you want to turn your camera on. I want to officially say thank you to Tara, but also to say farewell to her, because this is Tara's last meeting, at least temporarily, because she was doing this temporarily. And as many of you know, last 3 meetings, we had 3 different project managers who supported us, and Tara and every one of the 3 have been just outstanding. And Tara is leaving us with as Joanne mentioned, a great legacy product as well. The updates for you that you just saw and those great the table that you saw, that's purely Tara's product. So I want to thank her for that as well. Tara, where are you? Can you just? Oh, I hope she's not already off. There you go. So thank you, and a big thanks for me. And anyway, so I just want to say farewell to all, and you'll be getting obviously lots of information from us shortly. Thank you all. Hey, wait! I have to gavel out with my.
Have to gavel out.
Yeah. The meeting is officially adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Cool.
I think today went really, really well.
Great.
Thank you both.
Our pleasure.
Oh, are we still streaming?
Yes. But yes, the meeting did go very well. And thank you, Tara, because you are the champion, girl.